This is Scott. Thank you, Daryl. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the September 911 Task Force meeting. Again, this is a hybrid meeting. We do have folks at City of Denver. So thanks again, Denver PSAP, for hosting those that could go in person, and then multiple people that are remote. As usual, we do have interpreters. So please be sure if you're going to speak to introduce yourself first, so the interpreters can relay that information to the folks that are watching. With that, I'll turn it over to Holly for the roll call if you are ready, Holly.
Holly is running a couple minutes late. She's on her way here, so I'm going to do the roll call if that's all right.
That's perfect.
Before I do, I want to remind people we don't take a roll call of everyone in attendance, only the voting members. So we do ask that everybody sign in. So if you go to the task force's webpage and click on the meeting page, there's a link. I'm going to go ahead and click it right now so that I can put it in the chat. That way people can sign in just by clicking on the link in the chat. There we go. So now it's in the chat. And I do also want to do another housekeeping item. We've got the camera set up so that people can see the room. And we've got another microphone set up. I'm not sure exactly how well it picks up at the back of the room. We tested it, it sounded okay, but those of you in the back of the room, if you need to speak, make sure you speak up so that the other participants can hear you as well as the interpreters. And let me get back to where I was if I can. Oh, there we are. Okay. So we'll start with the roll call of voting members. Let's make this not incredibly tiny. Maybe not that big. Middle ground. There we go. All right. So for CCI, we need Steve Moreno, Tina Powell, or Marie Madrigal.
Tina Powell's here.
Thank you, Tina. For CML, we need Jacqueline Turwey.
Jacqueline's here.
Jacqueline. For the accessibility community, Cheryl Garcia. Cheryl, are you in attendance? Okay, nothing heard. For at-large member, I saw Billy Allen on, so I'm going to go ahead and check him as in attendance. Tim Kunkelman, I think he said he wasn't going to be able to make it this morning. Tim, are you on the line by any chance?
No, he'll be in the car pretty soon, though. I think, Daryl, this is Wes, and dial in as able. He's at Spokane heading east to Idaho.
Understood. Thank you, Wes. For other BESP representative, Mary Jane Rasher.
I'm here. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And we just heard from Wes, so we know he's here. I saw Darla Joseph on. For T-Mobile, Jenny Santana.
Good morning. I am here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. For Viero, we need Ryan Hoke or Mary Graham.
Ryan and Mary are both here.
Excellent, thank you. For Cinch, formerly known as Intelliquent, we need Cindy Harkop or Lindsay Carr. I'm sorry if I mispronounced any names. Cindy or Lindsay from Intelliquent, aka Cinch, are you on the line? Okay. Other CLEC VoIP representative for bandwidth.com, Jay Slater or Erica Stevens.
Jay Slater's here.
Thank you, Jay. Now for our 911 representatives, Jody Chin from Gunnison County.
Good morning. I'm here.
Thank you, Jody. Morgan County, Danette Martin.
Good morning. I'm here.
Thank you. And I saw Jennifer Kirkland on for Grand Junction. Lita, we need Kimberly Culp or Val Turner.
Good morning, this is Kimberly. I'm on.
Thank you, Kimberly. For AdCom, we need Jackie Reynolds or Ron Collins.
Ron Collins.
Thank you, Ron. For Eagle County, we need Beth Dobransky.
Beth Dobransky is here.
Thank you, Beth. For Sterling Communications Center, Alicia Librand or Paula Null.
Alicia Librand's here.
Thank you, Alicia. And I know Jeff is on, we heard from him earlier. For Delta County 911, Karina Artaz. Karina, are you on the line?
I am.
Karina? Douglas County 911, we need Deanie Shin or Shannon Brent.
This is Deanie. I'm on. Good morning.
Deanie? I've known you for over a decade. You'd think I know how to pronounce your name by now. Andrew Dameron is in the room. For Jeff Com, we need Michael Brewer or Kyle Nicholson. Michael or Kyle for Jeff Com, are you on the line? Okay, nothing heard. For City of Aurora, we need Tina Bonetta or Scott Newman. And Scott, I know, is on the line. Thornton 911, Sean Coleman, Brandy Seaton, or Ashley Betchen.
This is Dora Mestis for Thornton 911. Sean Coleman has retired and I'll be the interim until further notice.
Okay, would you do me a favor and send me an email just to remind me so we can update the roster for the next meeting?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mandy Stolzheimer is in the room. For Garfield County, we need Carl Stevens or Tom Holman.
Carl Stevens is here.
Thank you, Carl. And finally, for Boulder Regional ETSA, we need Patty West or Christine Mason.
Patty's on, Daryl.
Thank you, Patty. We have 86% of the voting members in attendance, maybe more when Tim joins us later. And if we have a vote, we need 13 to vote yes. If we need to vote on bylaws, recommendations on legislation, PUC rules, or tariff, we need 17 to vote yes for a supermajority. And so I will turn it back over to you, Scott.
And this is Scott. Thank you for that, Daryl. Next item of order is the approval of the July meeting minutes. Do we have any discussion on the item? And if not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
Jeff Irvin, so moved.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Jeff. And can I get a second?
Wes Horn, I'll second.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Wes. Any opposed to the approval, please say so now. Hearing none, we will consider the minutes approved. So this is still Scott. We will now switch over. We do have our guest speaker to do a presentation today, 911 in the cloud, from Fred Miller. And before we do that, Daryl, do you have any intro that you'd like to provide, or we just hand it over to Fred?
Well, I need to make sure that Fred is here. Fred, are you on the line by any chance or in the room? So I don't believe our presenter has joined us yet. I think what I would suggest is that we go ahead and continue on to standing reports, and then if he joins us later, we can backtrack.
And this is Scott. I totally agree. Thanks for that, Daryl. So with that, we'll continue on with yourself, sir, for the PUC update.
All right, so we have standing reports, PUC staff update, 22R-0122T. That's the notice of proposed rulemaking we did. This is a rulemaking to improve rules in a number of areas, but specifically focusing on 911 reliability. After those rules were introduced, there were a number of comments that were filed, and the judge who is overseeing that proceeding directed the participants to engage in workshops to come up with consensus rules. We have met a good number of times for a lot of hours, actually, going through workshops, looking through all of the different comments that were filed, as well as additional thoughts and suggestions that participants came up with after the workshops began. And I'm happy to report that we have developed a consensus set of draft rules that have now been transmitted to the judge in that proceeding. The judge has set additional comment deadlines and reply comments. And unfortunately, I don't have those open in front of me right now to tell you what those deadlines are, but I can send that out to everybody. And you don't have to have participated in the process up to this point to comment either. So if you want to read through the draft consensus rules that the participants came up with, and if you have thoughts on that and want to file comments, you're welcome to do so. There will be a final comment hearing date on October 13th at 11:30 a.m., at which time the ALJ or the administrative law judge will take Oh, and Tracy said in the chat, initial comments about the consensus rules are due by September 19th, and response comments are due by September 30th. So thank you for that, Tracy. And if anybody has any questions about how to file comments, just email me and I'll give you instructions for how to do that. You do not have to have a lawyer. You do not have to file an intervention. It's fairly simple process if you want to file comments in that proceeding. So on October 13th, the administrative law judge will hear any verbal comments from people who want to provide them at that time. And we'll also hear from the participants who worked in those workshops, and we'll make a decision on where to go from there. If the judge decides to accept the consensus rules as they were presented to him, then those will be filed with the Secretary of State, and they will become permanent rules after, I think it's after 90 days or something like that. I'm not positive on the process there, but it'll be fairly soon. FCC proceedings, we're not currently aware of any FCC proceedings with open comment cycles. I did want to mention that about a year and a half ago, the FCC stated that they were going to, or they directed, the FCC directed its own staff to start preparing to share outage information from the network outage reporting system that the FCC has, to start sharing that data with certain state agencies. They had a webinar yesterday to kind of go over what state agencies can expect to see in those reports when they get access. There will be forms that we have to fill out, and we have to go through training. The information in that database is considered if somebody, or if, excuse me, got off track here. We are allowed to share the data in an aggregated, anonymized form. So we can't say, you know, who had an outage that was reported in the database, but we can say there were X number of outages among all of the carriers in 2022, for instance. So what I'm looking forward to with that is you know, the ability to get a broader view of 911 reliability in the state, because right now, because of the commission, the limits on the commission's jurisdictional authority, we only have the ability to require reporting on basic emergency service outages, which does not include any outages that occur within the originating service provider networks. So in the future, we should be able to provide a broader view of the reliability of 911 in the state as to whether it's getting better or worse over time. So I just wanted to let people know that that is underway. I don't know when they're going to send out those forms or make those forms available for us to be able to apply for that access, but as soon as they do, we'll be moving on that. State legislature, the legislature is out of session. It will return on January 9th in 2023. There are currently two bills being considered by the task force's legislative committee, and I won't steal their thunder. I'll let Jackie talk about that later. I have heard a rumor that Department of Public Safety has a 911 related bill that they've been in discussion with the legislature about, but I haven't received any details on that bill. I haven't gotten any calls back from them either. So if anybody has any information about that, that you'd be willing to share, or that you think would be appropriate to share with the task force, please pass it along. So I'll just ask now, does anybody know anything about that bill? Okay, I guess we will find out. Federal legislation. Unfortunately, I've got a lot to talk about it here. There is a bill in Congress right now. It's House, not House resolution. It's I forget what the R stands for, but it's HR 7624 to auction off bands of spectrum in the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz range. An amendment has been added to the bill that would allow for up to $10 billion from the revenue generated by the auction to be used to fund a grant program for next generation 911. That is not a typo. $10 billion is what it calls for, which would make it by far the largest federal grant for 911 support ever made. The bill passed the House with the amendment. It is still sitting in the Senate. There is a Senate version of the bill, Senate 4117, but that version does not include the grant program. So if the Senate passes that version of the bill, it'll have to go to a joint committee between the Senate and the House to work out the differences and Your guess is as good as mine as to whether the grant program survives or not. There is some bad news associated with the grant program, however. The House version as it's currently written makes it very unclear as to whether Colorado would be eligible to participate in that grant program. It has a number of provisions that are problematic for us. One is that we would have to certify, like we did on the last grant program, that no 911 funds have been used in the last 180 days that in any way violates, excuse me, the FCC's new 911 fee rules. But this applies to 911 funds, to local 911 funds, not just state 911 funds. And so it's not entirely clear that we would be able to say with certainty that all 56 911 authorities in the state have used 911 funds in accordance with the FCC's rules. It'd be very difficult to sign a affidavit to that effect, since I don't know with 100% certainty that it's true. And if any of the 56 911 authorities spent any 911 funds on anything that's not allowed under the FCC's rules, then that would kick all of Colorado out of the eligibility, not just that local agency. Mandy?
I have a quick question, Daryl. The FCC was going to amend those rules. Did that happen? And if it did, I apologize for my ignorance and not keeping up. In regards to the utilization of funds for radios.
No, they have not. So there was, in addition to the 911 rulemaking, they also had a 911 fee diversion strike force, which made a number of recommendations. One of the recommendations was that the FCC needed to be a lot clearer on which radio expenses were allowable and which radio expenses weren't.
Right.
And so far, the FCC has taken no action on that.
Okay.
There were a handful of 911 authorities here in the Front Range that also filed a what's called a reconsideration request, asking the FCC to clarify a number of things, and they have not acted on that either. So we're still working with the original rulemaking.
Thank you.
Another requirement is that for a state to be eligible, it has to have established, quote, effective cybersecurity resources for next generation 911. Currently, cybersecurity on the EZNet is Lumen's responsibility, since they're the EZNet provider. But cybersecurity within the PSAPs is entirely up to each PSAP. We don't have any statewide resources to support PSAPs on their cybersecurity hygiene. So, you know, whether what we're doing would meet their qualifications or not is kind of a matter of interpretation, I think. So we would just have to try and see if they think that what we're doing is sufficient. We have to have a plan for public outreach and education on how the public can best use next generation 911. Well, public outreach and public education right now are completely a local matter in Colorado. We have no state funds to pay for a statewide public education campaign. So that is another matter that we may or may not meet their requirements on. And then finally, they require that states have the ability to purchase NG911 services through an RFP procurement process. And we don't have that because we have a tariff process instead. We don't have a mechanism for issuing an RFP or awarding a contract or paying for a contract on a state level because all 911 funds are distributed to the local level. If we are deemed eligible, the amount of money that Colorado might be eligible to receive will depend on the formula that NTIA will come up with through a rulemaking process related to the grant program. If it's similar to the formula that they used for the last round of grants, we could be eligible for as much as $200 million. That seems unbelievable, but that's how the math works out. Even coming up with proposals that would meet the requirements of the grant to use all $200 million, I think would be a challenge for us, quite frankly. And it's not just Colorado. I think a lot of other states would have a similar issue because most states are moving towards financing 911 through recurring charges rather than through large capital expenses. So I think a lot of states are going to have trouble utilizing these funds if they do become available in the form that it currently exists. But we don't know that this bill is going to pass, and if it does pass, it may change dramatically before it passes. But I just wanted to give people sort of a readout of the bill as it exists right now. Go ahead, Jack.
I just had a question about the certification that we're not spending outside the FTC rules. Would you be comfortable if all the authorities came back and said that they haven't, or?
Not sure all the authorities could.
Daryl, the interpreters missed that second comment. Can you repeat it, please?
So Jackie asked if the state 911 program would be comfortable certifying for the grant that all 56 911 authorities have refrained from misusing 911 funds under the FCC's rules. And then Mandy from Montrose said that she wasn't sure that all of the 911 authorities could certify that. But yes, I think if we got a written affidavit from all 56 911 authorities saying we have not misused funds in the last 180 days, that would give me enough confidence to sign an affidavit in return saying that based on this information, I can certify that no 911 authorities have misused 911 funds.
And,
But getting all 56 911 authorities to respond on anything is sometimes difficult.
and that being said, this is Jackie again. The FCC rules, my understanding, are still fairly vague when it comes to what all our authorities currently spend money on. And so the vagueness, I think, puts us in a position where we could basically say, yes, we're under the vagueness, since it wasn't.
It's true. And I will also say that even if this bill passes, we're probably looking at 2 or 3 years before the funds were made available. So in that 2 or 3 years, the FCC could do another rulemaking to clarify those rules. And I hope they would get a lot of pressure from not only Colorado, but other states to do that. Because otherwise certifying we haven't misused funds based on your vague rules is a very difficult thing to say.
Right.
Carol, this is Jeff.
Go
Can I
ahead,
make a comment? You know, perhaps we could just have some system asking the authorities on an annual basis to adopt a resolution stating that, you know, whereas, you know, blah, blah, blah. And perhaps they can do that recurrently every year when they adopt their budget or at the beginning of the year. And then you just have that in pocket at all times.
Right, so the statute now requires that governing bodies respond to an annual data request from the commission. And the data request that I sent out this year included that question, just a yes or no. Have you spent, and I didn't reference the FCC rules because those were fairly new, but I referenced the statute. I said section 2911-104 of the statute, of the Colorado revised statute, which lists the things that you can spend 911 funds on. I said, did you spend were all of your 911 fund expenditures in compliance with this section? Everyone who responded said yes, they were in compliance, but we had 11 911 authorities that didn't respond to the data request. And even though it's required in statute that they respond, there's no penalty if they don't. So again, we're getting back to the same problem of not having a 100% response rate.
And I apologize to the interpreters. That was Jeff Irvin, JCCA, that inserted that comment.
This is Daryl.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jeff, for reminding us to announce ourselves because I don't think I've been doing that.
Daryl,
Go ahead, Joe.
Joe Benkert. The question I have is, has the commission or the task force engaged with Colorado's representatives and senators regarding changes we would like to see made to this legislation so that we can get the funds to spend on cybersecurity and other things that the bill would require us to have, but we need the funding to get?
So Joe, no, the commission has not done that. I am prohibited by state policy from communicating with legislators unless they communicate with me first. I will tell you though that the National Association of State 911 Administrators, which I'm on the board of, has written an open letter and there's a link to that in the standing report to Congress outlining a number of these concerns as well as other concerns that NASNA has with the legislation. And it does list me as a person that legislators can reach out to if they want more information.
Should the task force reach out directly to the Colorado legislators and tell them why it's important for us? I know I've seen statements made by some of the federal legislators regarding the Marshall Fire and some changes they want to see made. Perhaps they're more receptive to comments we might have on things we need to improve 911.
Well, what I would suggest is that maybe that's a good topic for the legislative committee, and I think the committee is meeting again on Monday. So Jackie, I don't know if that's something we could discuss at that meeting.
Absolutely.
And then finally, I wanted to mention that there is another bill, Senate Bill 4007, that would require the U.S. Department of Justice to submit a report to Congress on whether there is a need for a program to support public safety officers, law enforcement, fire, and EMS, and public safety telecommunicators dealing with work-related post-traumatic stress disorders. It has passed the Senate. There is an identical version in the House that's currently in committee. So we'll see if that passes. Since it doesn't require any money and all it does is require DOJ to provide a report to Congress, my guess is it probably will pass. I don't see anything controversial about it, even in this hyper-partisan environment that we have right now. So I mentioned that will pass, but I'll keep track of that as well. There were a number of other 911 related bills that were introduced this year or over the last 2 years, because this is the end of the 117th Congress, 116th, I forget which. We're nearing the end of that, but a lot of those bills just never went anywhere simply because Congress is not, the parties are not playing well together these days, if anybody hasn't noticed. Any questions on either of those bills or additional comments? Okay, sorry for taking up a lot of time with that. State 911 surcharge and flat wireless prepaid 911 surcharge. The state 911 surcharge distributions were $558,702.84 in July, $559,079 in August. Prepaid wireless 911 charge distributions. These are clocking almost always clocking in at over $1.2 million a month, which is great. July saw $1,288,543.97, and then August was $1,200,218.74. So again, the state 911 surcharge distributions are distributed based on how many concurrent sessions you are paying for from Lumen through the tariff. And the prepaid wireless 911 charge distribution is distributed based on how many wireless 911 calls are taken by your PSAPs as compared as a percentage of the total number of wireless 911 calls statewide. Emergency telephone charge deadline reminders. Deadline's coming up. November 1st is the last day you could file an application with the commission to increase your emergency telephone charge above the threshold established by the commission and have any hope of it being approved in time for a February 1st effective date. That threshold right now is $1.81. And I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier when I was talking about PUC proceedings, but there is a proceeding right now to set the surcharge rates and threshold for 2023, and the proposal on the table is $1.97, I think, if I recall correctly, for the threshold for 2023, and that's just based on inflation. And then July 1st of next year is the last day to file an application with the commission to increase the number of concurrent sessions that you're being reimbursed for beginning in 2024. Earlier is better in this case, in case there was any issue with the application. But the application has to be approved by the commission by August 1st in order for it to be included in the distribution percentages for the following year. So going back a little bit, we do have that other proceeding to set the surcharge rates for 2023. That is an ongoing proceeding. The initial proposals was, and I don't have them all in front of me, but if I recall them correctly from memory, $1.97 is the threshold for the local emergency telephone charge rate, 8 cents per month per line for the state 911 surcharge, which is a decrease of 1 penny. A state 911, or excuse me, a prepaid wireless 911 charge rate of It was 170, yeah, it was 170. And that has to be based on the average of the local emergency telephone charge rates plus the proposed state 911 surcharge. And then there were distribution formulas attached that would be approved by the commission for both the prepaid wireless and the state 911 surcharge distribution. We've received a number of comments. Some of the comments mostly focused on the state 911 surcharge and the fact that with the tariff filing that has been filed by Lumen that's another proceeding I should have included in this report. Lumen filed a tariff to add in ECATs as part of their EZNet service, and as part of that, there would be an increase to the monthly recurring charges. And so the argument that was made was that with that increase to the monthly recurring charges, the state 911 surcharge should be kept at 9 cents instead of reduced to 8 cents. So the commission will be deciding on that based on those comments that were received, and that will be done. We're expecting that to be on the commissioner weekly meeting for a commission decision by the 21st. So on the other item that I should have included here, Lumen did file a tariff amendment to include ECATs with 16 different reports for voice 911 calls, and 16. No, it was more than that. I want to say 18. No, I don't remember the exact number. A good number of reports for voice 911 calls, and then 16 separate reports for text to 911, which text to 911 doesn't have any reports under the current Intrado Insights or Clearview reporting package. With that was also an increase in the monthly recurring charges that 911 governing bodies would be paying. That was proposed to go into effect on the 16th of this month. Douglas County filed a Douglas County filed a protest letter basically asking the commission to suspend the effective date and set the tariff for a hearing so that 911 governing bodies and other stakeholders could participate in that process and make sure that the things that Douglas County put in their protest letter was, one, that there were specific reports that they thought should have been included or would be beneficial to include that were not included in the tariff offering, and also that they wanted to make sure that the pricing was appropriate that Lumen was proposing. So the commission will be deciding on whether or not to do that on next Wednesday, on the 14th. So it will be done before the effective date. If the commission agrees with the protest letter or accepts the protest letter, it will be suspended for 120 days, which is the standard. So it would not go into effect automatically until January 14th of 2023. And it would be set for a hearing. That doesn't mean it has to go all the way to January 14th before it becomes effective. Just means it wouldn't automatically become effective until January 14th, which would give the commission time to set a hearing and get public comment and so forth on the tariff amendment.
And Daryl, this is Jeff.
Jeff?
Yeah, this is Jeff Irvin, JCCA. Just for your information, Adams Arapahoe and Jeff, JCCA, will be intervening in light of that also.
Understood. Yeah, there'll be an opportunity for anybody who wants to intervene if it gets set for a hearing. The commission will be making that decision officially next Wednesday.
Daryl.
Jackie?
This is Jackie. I just wanted to point out that one of the reports that a lot of authorities are already getting through their ECATs was not included. And that's kind of the report that we really wanted to make sure was included because we're already receiving it and didn't want to have to do something separate or different. And we're hoping that that would be included. And that's the wireless report.
The wireless routing analysis?
Wireless routing analysis, yes.
And I did want to say too, a couple of people asked me, so when the EZNet tariff was filed in 2017, commission staff actually filed a protest letter and was able to participate in those meetings between the parties and Lumen. And I've had a couple of people ask me why we didn't do that this time. And the reason is because back in 2017, we had a much more robust telecom staff presence at the commission. Linda Tariani had a background in 911, as did Susan Travis, and to a lesser extent, Teresa Ferguson. Susan, Lynn, and Teresa are no longer with the commission. They've all moved on and have not been replaced with other people who have 911 backgrounds. So I am the only person that the commission has with a 911 background. And the way commission proceedings work, if they are, I'm trying to find the right word. It's not litigious. It's not the right word. But if there are different parties that are working potentially in opposition to each other, commission staff actually has to separate themselves into trial staff and advisory staff. Trial staff are allowed to participate in meetings between the stakeholders. Advisory staff are only allowed to talk to the commissioners. And the reason for that is because they basically become an extension of the commissioners at that point. Commissioners are not supposed to have information that is not officially filed in the proceeding. So if I were to participate as commission staff or as trial staff, there would be nobody with any 911 background to advise the commissioners on the proceeding. So I have to be advisory staff, which means I have to not participate in the conversation. So it's really going to be up to you guys. It's going to be between Lumen and the 911 stakeholders to get together if the commission does suspend the effective date and set the proceeding for a hearing. It'll be up to you guys to get together with Lumen and discuss your differences and come up with a compromise if that's possible, so that when the hearing date comes along, you have the ability to report to the administrative law judge that you have come to an agreement. And I apologize that I'm not able to help you work through those differences like commission staff has in the past, but it's just under our rules, it's just not an option right now. I have made the case, by the way, internally that there should be another 911 person at the commission just for this reason. We'll see if that ever bears fruit. And so that was probably the longest staff report I have ever given, and I apologize for that. And Scott, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask if our presenter is on the line yet. Nobody's really joined us here in the room, so I don't think he's here in person, but if Fred Miller is on the line.
And Daryl, please don't ever apologize. Your input is always greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Jeff.
And this is Scott. Daryl, I did not see him in the attendee list here online. But Fred, are you on the call? Maybe he's a dial-in.
Andrew, when he was communicating with you about lunch, did he seem to know which day we were?
He did.
Okay. Well, maybe an emergency came up. That happens. Well, with that, then Scott, I'll turn it over to you for introducing the next standing report.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Daryl, for the report. Very detailed and, like Jeff said, very helpful information. So thank you. So we will move on to Lumen. Wes, I know that Tim's not here. Are you able to chime in for the report?
Yes, and there's nothing else for us to add at this time.
Thanks, Wes. I do see that there is a sub bullet there. Do authorities want their alley retrieval reports going forward due to the new system?
Right. I think Holly actually added that. Did you add that, Holly?
So this is Holly. We had talked about with the new system that Lumen was sending alley reports as spreadsheets to everybody. You may have noticed that stopped in the last couple months. The commission hasn't received them, nor have the authorities. And we just wanted to do a general poll if people even noticed those had stopped. And if you haven't, then maybe the answer is no, you no longer need them. Or if you did notice they stopped and that's something you still wanted to receive, open that back up to Lumen, or if you feel the new system is sufficient enough.
Yeah, as background on that, the alley, prior to the EZNet, the alley retrieval reports were really the only metrics you got from CenturyLink regarding your call volumes. And it wasn't really call volumes, it was alley retrievals. There were some adjustments that CenturyLink did to those reports to try to remove duplicates, but we've never been very at least I have never been very confident that they were accurate as a measure of call volume. Now that we have first Clearview and now Intrado Insights, that's what we've been using to gather data on wireless call volume. So I guess the question for 911 authorities is, were those alley retrieval reports useful to you? And if so, we will ask, this would be an opportunity to ask Lumen to resume providing those reports. And if they are no longer useful to you because of the other reports you get through Intrado Insights, then maybe we just retire that.
And Daryl, this is Jeff again.
Jeff?
Jeff Irvin, JCC. I would just say, I don't think that I need to continue to receive the reports, but having some periodic training just to make sure that people know what information is available in Intrado Insights and how to pull that might be helpful.
And I see a message from Kimberly in the chat that says, for Lido, we reviewed them and they were useful. Intrado Insights is not ideal. We would like to we would like to continue the reports until ECATS.
And that's
Yeah, that makes
understandable.
sense. Yeah, that makes
This is Wes. I'll look into that. I know that we had a personnel change coming up. And so, yeah, let me get back and have those things get continued, at least in the interim, until ECATS is in force.
Last ones I got were in April, Wes.
Okay, April, thank you.
Thank you, Wes.
This is Scott. Thank you all for that. Moving on, BESP report from Intrado. Mary Jane, do you have anything?
Scott, I don't have anything to report today. Thank you.
This is Scott. Thank you, Mary Jane. Moving on to the Bylaws Committee, Kimberly Culp.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kimberly. Is it okay if I share my screen, Daryl? Will that mess you up?
I think I can do that. Let me stop sharing mine. I'm actually running off of 2 different computers, so it's hard.
And that's okay if it's not. I just didn't know if it would be helpful if I was to display the red lines.
There you go. You're free to do so.
Thank you. All right, so if I'm sharing the proper screen, everyone should be able to see the red lines for the bylaws.
We see them.
Okay, fantastic. So the red lines were bulleted in the report and also communicated out from Holly. So thank you for that, PUC team. I do have a couple of additional changes. The Bylaws Committee did meet to discuss the change requests from our last meeting. And post that, we did get a couple of additional recommendations for some cleanup. I do want to say that we did not go through the bylaws section by section. We just focused on the immediate request from the 911 task force. So one change being recommended, and this is a new change that you may not have seen prior to now, would be to add a revised date so we can track when revisions are made. So just having some sort of revised date on the document itself. A cleanup item as I scroll down was we had a typo under section 1 indicating 28, but reflecting 29. So we need to correct that simple typo. The next item is a little bit different. This has to do with attendance. So that was the area that we were working on. So the request came to us on, is the attendance requirement in 12 months or is it in a calendar year? And so what we are recommending is that we focus on the calendar year, January to December. We believe this is when members are appointed, officers are nominated and taking the role of their new position. And that way, if we align the attendance with that calendar year, we would be aligned in other areas within the bylaws. We also wanted to reflect back on recorded absence of not being 3, but lower it down to 2. So in this section 4, we are actually just referring further into the document on Article for section 5. So I'll scroll down there so you can see the language. So specifically here, we identified that missing 2 or more regular meetings in a calendar year would be subject to removal. And we wanted to do the 2 versus 3 because we only meet 6 times in a calendar year. And then the other item to reflect a change is just at the very bottom of identifying, again, a date and also who our new chair is. The recommendation from the bylaws committee is that if we approve the bylaws as presented today with these changes, that they wouldn't go into effect until January of 2023. So we would make the changes today and then they would be effective in January. So those are the changes as recommended by your bylaws subcommittee, and I will pause to see if we have any questions.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Kim, and the committee very much for your work on that. I do see that Jeff put his hand up first and then Joe.
Hi, this is Jeff Irvin, JCCA. Kimberly, the only concern I had, and I voiced this to Holly, was it's not clear to me that if the alternate or proxy attends, if that fulfills the attendance requirement, and therefore that two meeting absence is rescinded.
Yeah, and I believe we do have it listed in here as it relates to you can identify your proxy. So thank you for that comment, and I will find that section so we can review that together. So right here, so voting members may designate an alternate to attend and vote in their stead. So that alternate must be on file. So the intent obviously is that you have your alternate on file, therefore they count. And it's not just anybody showing up. And so then we know that they are voting on your behalf and then their attendance is recorded on those meetings. So from a bylaws perspective, I believe that is how we are operating. If you would like us to review some additional language here, we can do that.
I'll leave that to Benkert.
And this is Scott. Thanks for that information, Kimberly. Joe, you have your hand up.
Yeah, first I'll reflect on the last one. Does the alternate have to be somebody associated with the same authority board or PSAP, or can it be someone with a different PSAP?
So as long as the voting member has written designation of that alternate and it's on file, we've had members representing other authority boards in their stead.
So for instance, if I, as the authority member, designated the alternate for Jeff Cobb, then that would be permissible, correct?
Correct.
This is Daryl.
Do we need to make that clear in here?
So from a member's perspective, from a bylaws, we were not asked to rewrite or review all of the bylaws. We were specifically asked to get into the attendance perspective. If the task force would like us to regroup and rewrite the bylaws and review other sections, we're happy to do so.
This is Daryl. So, whether it says it in the bylaws or not, maybe it could be clearer, but just as a matter of practice, attendance by an alternate has always counted as attendance by the voting member. So it did not count as an absence as long as there was an alternate present. And then we have never stated that the alternate has to be a representative or employed by the same entity as the voting member. In fact, even the primary representative for that entity doesn't have to be employed by them if they've been designated by that entity.
Yeah, we've had some meetings like from the Next Generation 911 Task Force where if it was a person with a different authority, they called them proxies. I'm not trying to make it different. I just want to make sure it was clear. My other question was where somebody is removed for not having for having missed 2 meetings, if no one steps up to put their name in to be voted on to take the place of that authority, can that representative or another representative of that authority be reelected for the chair they were just removed from?
There's nothing in here that indicates they couldn't be. I'm sure that would be something that would be reviewed by the chair in the recorded absence perspective in that dialogue they're having with that agency. And then, of course, it would go up to the membership to vote.
And this is Daryl. That is what we've done in the past with vacancies, is if the person who was filling that position wanted to continue, then the chair will ask for other nominations. And if there aren't any other nominations, then they'll just ask the membership to vote on reappointing that person.
And this has got just come from Daryl. I know of twice in the last 4 years that we have done exactly that.
This is Mandy with Westco Dispatch. Going back to Joe's comment, Kimberly, can you please share your screen again back up on section, under general section 1? Thank you. I think, Joe, in my opinion, that second paragraph, voting members must be employed or otherwise be acting in a representative capacity of the category identified in Article 2, Section 3. So that's, if it's a 911, somebody representing the 911 community, it doesn't state specifically they have to be the same agency, PSAP, or authority, just in that same category, which I think that sentence right there addresses the concern about their proxy or their the other person representing them in a voting member's absence. And that's the sentence under which, for instance, myself and Matt operate, because we are employed by 2 different employers, but he is my proxy for the vote with the PUC task force.
And Scott, I also see Jenny with her hand up. I'm not sure if you saw that or not.
This is Scott. Thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate that. Jenny, why don't you go forward with your question, please?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. This is Jenny Santana with T-Mobile. I've only been on the task force, I think, under a year. So I kind of have a basic question in regards to attendance. Ever since I've been on the task force, there's been a virtual option to join. I don't know if that is, as a result of COVID, or if that's normal course. But that would, kind of make a difference for attendance for folks that are not located in Colorado like myself. So any clarification around that, whether we intend to have both in-person and virtual to the extent we are able to be in person, would be helpful for my information.
Jenny,
I'm sorry, Kimberly, go ahead.
Oh, I apologize. This is Kimberly. So Jenny, yes, the intent is to always have a virtual meeting, and we've folded in some of the in-persons, but even if we were to say we're going to do in-person for every meeting, we always keep a virtual option, especially for members that are out of state or in different corners and pockets of Colorado.
Jenny, we started doing that long before COVID. Jenny, we've been doing hybrid meetings since long before COVID.
Okay, this is Jenny. Thanks for that clarification.
And this is Scott. So good discussion. I don't see any other hands up. To circle back to Kimberly's question, we did ask at the last task force meeting for the subcommittee to review specifically this attendance question. Does anybody, the first question I'm going to ask is, does anybody have a desire to ask the subcommittee to review the entire bylaws or any other sections aside from attendance? Okay, hearing none, then we will go back again to Kimberly's question. They did the work for us, so thank you very much to the group for doing this. I will entertain a motion to approve this amended section for the bylaws that will again take effect January 1st of next year.
This is Carl. I would make that motion.
This is Scott. Thank you, Carl. Can I get a second?
Jeff Rubin,
I'll
second.
We had a couple seconds, but I heard Jeff. Thank you all. So any opposed to adopting this change in the bylaws effective January 1st, 2023?
Scott, this is Holly. Can you say who seconded again?
This is Scott, Holly. There was a couple seconds, but I did hear Jeff for sure. And I am hearing no opposition, so we will adopt this to take effect January 1st, 2023. And thank you, Bylaws Committee, for all your work on that. Kimberly, did you have anything else that you would like to report on before we move on?
No, Scott, thank you.
And thank you. So moving on now to the Legislative Committee, Jackie Louise.
Morning, this is Jackie Louise. Daryl, can you? 911 draft. The first thing that the legislative committee has been working on for, oh, this is the second year, is the misuse of 911 legislation. Representative McCluskey has agreed to take that as one of her first 5 this year, or actually it's next year, but in the next session. And she has sent the bill to the drafter. The committee did meet and tweak the language just a little bit. That's why I was asking Daryl if he could put it up.
I'm working on it.
Nothing substantial, but some tweaks that we made, and I did send that off to the legislator. And to note, previously, the task force did vote to move forward with this bill. Sorry, Daryl.
All right. I'm on Google Chrome right now, so it's a little slow. What did you want to highlight?
Just some of the tweaks, like we called it an ECC instead of a PSAP, but just a few little tweaks in there that we made sure that we also addressed that it's not only 911 calls, but it's also calls to the administrative line that impede the flow of work. So those were the highlights that we tweaked. Are there any questions or comments?
Jackie, this is Kimberly.
Hey, Kimberly.
And I would raise my hand, Scott, but I can't find my hand today. I'm not sure where it's at. That could be intentional. I just want to say on behalf of our PSAPs that we are very much in support of this portion of this misuse of draft legislation. Several of my PSAPs were harassed ruthlessly for many, many months in 2021, and it really impacted just the people, not only the operation, but the dispatchers themselves. So we just wanted to thank the legislative committee to put this together, and we are very hopeful that it gets traction and we get bipartisan support so it moves quickly.
This is Scott. Thank you very much, Kimberly. Jennifer, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Scott. This is Jennifer Kirkland, and I would echo Kimberly's support. We also have been adversely affected not only by political protesters calling into the center, but also by citizens who treat our dispatchers as a public dumping ground with no recourse by law enforcement because of there's really no good law to charge these people with. So I appreciate the legislative committee's work on this and the support that we have both from the PUC task force and the our representative in the House, Representative McCluskey, as well as Jackie Louise's continued persistence on this.
And thank you, this is Jackie. Thank you for all those comments. I do want to say that Kathy Rayleigh brought this to the legislative committee's attention a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Anyway,
Oh, wow.
and so yes, we've been moving forward and we are very excited about trying to get something on the books so that we can at least address what's happening. Centers.
This is Scott. Thanks, Jackie, for that. I also see that Holly has her hand up.
Yeah, this is Holly. I was just kind of curious on how they define fictitious emergency. What one person sometimes believes is an emergency and they want to.
Oh, did you get the set up?
No,
Now?
no. Now that he's done with it,
Isn't necessarily.
2 miles away
Would you go ahead and get everything packed up, get it ready to go?
already. We're gonna,
Make sure you're muted.
yeah,
if you
lift
would,
with
please.
him.
Is there anything
this
you
is-
can lift
thi-
them?
this is Scott.
He's done.
Billy, your microphone is hot.
I already have a copy. That's your copy.
Daryl, I don't know if you have the ability to mute him by chance. Thank you, sir. Holly, I apologize. You were interrupted. Please go ahead.
I guess I'm just wondering how fictitious is defined.
This is Jackie, and we did talk about that a lot. Fictitious is normally defined as I call in and say, my next door neighbor is selling drugs and you need to tap the SWAT team. There's this thing that people do also called swatting. It actually happened to my sister where they have their phone number and they call and the whole SWAT team shows up to a residential house that has no emergency, it has no drugs kind of thing. So that happens quite a bit in 911 across the country. And so that's what we were addressing.
When people are using law enforcement to harass other people.
Correct.
And Holly, I think there's a distinction there between suspicious activity and fictitious activity where you're making up something out of whole cloth that's not happening versus suspecting somebody next door is selling drugs or something.
And yeah, I think those are a couple of like the obvious examples of fictitious. I guess I'm thinking more so of situations where people are calling 911 to bring in law enforcement for situations to harass an individual that they are claiming they feel fearful, while that may not actually, there may be no threat. Is that falling within fictitious?
This is Daryl, I think.
I'm gonna
Because
use an example, the Amy Cooper situation, who filmed a man claiming she was being threatened, called 911, had video, a threat was not taking place against her body. Is that where we're going with this as well? In a situation where people are weaponizing 911 against other individuals?
And this is Jackie. We did have a lot of conversation about that type of harassing use of 911. And yes, that would be included if something like that happened, I believe, is what our intent was.
And this is Daryl, I think, you know, a reasonable interpretation of that, everything she was reporting wasn't fictitious. There really was a man there, but what he was doing, what she said he was doing was fictitious. So I think that would probably fall into this. I mean, that's just my interpretation.
And this is Jackie. I know we talked about putting more specific language in that and we left it there. The drafter, I'm sure will be coming back with clarifications and questions and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, they may want to define what fictitious means in this
They may want to.
context.
And I'll make a note that we as a committee look at that to be prepared for what the drafter.
This is Daryl, and I know this has gone through a lot of discussions. Like you said, it was first brought to the legislative committee like 2 years ago. You know, I guess one question I have still is there anything else in statute that could be used for actual swatting situations? Because I think in most states, swatting is usually considered a felony. whereas this is just a misdemeanor. So I don't know if there's another statute that could be used for swatting situations.
And this is Jackie, and I'll make a note to research that.
But if there isn't, maybe at least this is a starting point. This is more than we have now.
This is Scott. Did anybody else on the call have any questions specific to this bill to run by Jackie at this time?
This is Holly. Jackie, will remind me, is this for next year's
Yes. it will-
legislative session?
It will be one of Representative McCluskey's first 5. And this is Jackie again. With that, we've also been working on draft legislation that we sent out to the task force a week, 2 weeks ago, somewhere in there, for everybody to look at, because we would like to ask for the task force to vote on whether to move forward with this legislation. We've had brief conversations with the representative. We've had a lot of discussion in the legislative committee, but it is 911 services enterprise legislation. And we wanted to bring this forward because it's very similar to 988's enterprise fund. And as Daryl was talking earlier about the grant, the need for cybersecurity, the need for possibly having to go out to RFP, those kind of things, this fund would give us a state mechanism to do those types of things at that level. And so I'm hoping everybody had a chance to read this, but basically the key features is it does not create any new surcharges or fees. There's no funding or authority would be taken from the 911 governing bodies. It does not impact the usage of state 911 surcharge to pay for basic emergency service. The features is that it would be composed of, we've asked for it to be composed of local governing body representatives that are appointed by the governor. We think that there's just a lot of things that this could undertake, and I'm just gonna point out those bullets real quick. Providing matching funds for federal grants, funding statewide voluntary minimum training program, funding EMD programs for PSAPs that currently do not have them, funding statewide public education, and Daryl mentioned the public education, public outreach, and the requirements for the grants. Funding statewide GIS projects, funding cybersecurity programs, funding statewide service contracts, funding grant programs for rural PSAPs, funding other organizations that support 911 in the state, such as the CCOA and the Resource Center and the Training Standards Institute. And so, like I said, I'm hoping that the task force members have had a chance to review this. Like I said, I think we sent it out last week or the week before.
That was Monday before last.
Yeah. So I would like the task force to consider a vote to move forward and direct the legislative committee to move forward with this bill. It doesn't mean anything will happen immediately. Of course, we have to get representatives in place that want to support this bill and get it to a drafter. All those other things need to happen. However, I would like to ask the task force for a vote for the legislative committee to move forward with this legislation.
Jackie, this is Mandy from Wesco again. In all fairness, when asking for a vote from the full task force, in reading this, it seems like it's a complete win-win, but what have been some of the historic oppositions to this?
Thank you, Mandy. This is Jackie. And yes, there has been a little bit of opposition, mainly in the idea that the previous enterprise boards have been appointed by the governor, and the governor could choose those people. That's why we put in draft that we would like those people to be representatives of 911, so that our governor is pretty supportive of us, but in the future, if you got a governor who just wanted to put somebody from housing in there or, whatnot, that's what we we're hoping to be able to go through as a draft to have that in there. So that was one of the oppositions. And Kimberly, would you speak just a little bit so that I don't misquote you?
Yeah, you bet. So this is Kimberly, and Lita will be a no on a vote. And our biggest concern has to do with what we control with our 911 surcharge and the duplication of some of these efforts here. So when we look at the state 911 surcharge, it would need to be increased to be able to fund these efforts. A lot of these efforts, if not all of them, are already funded by our local surcharge. So in essence, we have our community up here in Northern Colorado that would be paying double or twice for some of these efforts. So some of our concern has to do with funding. We're trying to keep a low surcharge, and all these additional surcharges and increase to our surcharges impacts our community. The other issue and concern that we have, again, was already brought up with the appointment of who is being appointed from a governor's perspective. The third piece of it would be the demarcation on the PSEP local authority side. So we really believe that a lot of strength is done when you're able to make these decisions and fund and allocate your funding on the items listed on this board from a local surcharge control perspective. And even though this state board, in theory, on how the bullets are today, isn't controlling or directing, when things are tied to funding, it gives us some concern. So details and how this would be drafted is really what we're interested in, because everything may have good intentions on the front end, but how it can be drafted and put together once it goes through that process, it may not come out the same with the same intentions. So that are some of our concerns that we've discussed at our board as it relates to this enterprise legislation.
Thank you, Kimberly. And Carl Stevens, I'm gonna pull you out of there too, because I know you had some comments for this.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I mean, Kimberly covered several areas. I currently support this in the current form, but I do have real concerns about what legs it'll take through this process. And I think this is probably the best solution we've seen. It also concerns me if Department of Public Safety is trying to run their own bill, because last time they tried to run a bill, they did come after our funding. And I think the enterprise bill does help because it does set a limit. If they take our funding, it set them over that limit.
Thank you, Carl. And this is Jackie. And, I feel like that this vote that I'm asking for is not, set in stone. This is going to move forward. It gives the permission for the legislative committee to do its research and to go forward and to answer these concerns and pros, so that we can get a really good draft to put in front of the legislator. So that's kind of why I'm asking for a yes vote, is so that we can move forward, versus a no vote, which would say to me that the committee would not work on this any longer. Any other comments, questions? Daryl, did you want to talk?
Yeah, so this is Daryl. I just wanted to point out too that the state 911 surcharge bill that passed in 2020, in its original form, it would have created a fund that the commission could then use to pay for statewide expenses related to 911. And because of Tabor concerns, it turned into a pass-through to the local agencies based on how many concurrent sessions you have. And it's been very helpful in that regard, because it's helping you pay your monthly recurring charges to Lumen. But it still leaves other types of expenses that were envisioned as being paid for through that fund as not having any funding mechanism. Those are things like the training program that we talked about, GIS program to get us closer to geospatial routing in the future through full next generation 911, cybersecurity support programs, and other types of things that would be beneficial to 911, but there's not really a convenient mechanism to pay for them on a statewide basis right now. And that puts Colorado in a minority of states. There are only 9 states that have no state level funding mechanism to pay for statewide expenses. So that's really what this bill is trying to rectify. And I do hear the concerns about who gets to make those decisions, who gets appointed to that board. But as far as finding a way to do this without running afoul of Tabor, this is the only way that I've seen for us to do it. And so, you know, it's up to the task force if you want the legislative committee to move forward with it or not. I personally feel like there needs to be some mechanism to pay for these expenses on a statewide basis, in addition to the ones that you are already covering at the local level. I do hear also the concern from Kimberly about duplication of expenses. You know, I think it's not a secret that there are some disparities still between some of the urban 911 authorities and some of the rural 911 authorities. I don't think that it's right for somebody driving across the state to not know if a passenger in the seat of my car is having a heart attack, whether that person is going to get CPR instructions or not. Or whether they are getting the same level of training in a telecommunicator who answers their 911 call or not. We don't want to take away local decisions like that, but I do think that citizens expect a minimum level of standard of service when they call 911. And that's the sort of thing that this enterprise board, I hope, would be tackling if this bill passes. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Daryl. This is Mandy with Wesco again, and I just want to clarify that as written, obviously going through the process, the language would change, but as written, the enterprise fund could fund things that are bulleted, not that it must fund those things. And I think that's a very clear distinction to be made and to be understood. And also that the funding doesn't, it clearly states that it doesn't take away the authority of the local control in 911. Just provides the funding mechanism that the local PSAP or the local authority could choose to utilize and or adopt.
That's great, and that's one of the this is Daryl. That's one of the reasons why the one-page lists as one of the things that it could fund a voluntary minimum training program, because the enterprise board wouldn't have any authority to require anybody to participate in that program. But especially for those rural agencies that have difficulty funding their own local training program, that could be very beneficial to them and help, like I was describing earlier, raise that floor so that everybody's working from a same minimum standard across the state. And then if 911 authorities want to spend more on training, they certainly can. But so it's not restricting them from doing so, but it would help bring up that standard of service.
Thank you, Daryl. And this is Jackie again. The only other thing I want to say again is that I don't know that we have any other way to provide matching funds for federal grants at this point in time. I know that we were able to get a federal grant because the PUC had money, and I don't want to say where it came from because I don't know details, but the PUC had money that they could put as matching funds. But at this point in time, I'm not sure we have a pot of money for matching funds. And if we are able to get quite a bit of money from the federal government, it would be helpful to have something in place before that happens.
This is Daryl. That is correct. The funds that were used for our last round of grants was from a Colorado Performance Assurance Plan fund. And it's a very, I won't go into the detail of what that fund was created for, but once it was created, the commission could direct that money to purposes of statewide benefit that it saw. But that money's gone because we used it for that grant. There's only like $250,000 left in that fund. So if we do have any future federal grants that have a matching requirement, we'll have to come up with some other way to meet that matching requirement.
This is Joe Benkert. I think there were two things we put into this to try and make sure that the programs that would be approved and funded by the enterprise would in fact support 911. One was the request to have the governor's appointees be representatives, stakeholders from the 911 community. And at the last legislative committee call, there was a representative from the governor's office on the call who said he thought that was a good idea, what they would want to do. The other part was, and I believe it got in there, was to limit the organizations that could bring proposals to the enterprise board would be statewide membership organizations representing 911, such as the task force or CCOA, which helps to make sure that they're getting things we need. I don't know what the Department of Public Safety's legislation is about, but if it's something that would also be in this area, rather than saying no, if we don't like that, would be to have a proposal like this that is an alternative to their proposal. And I would note that the CCOA has, a proposal that they will get 911 surcharge funds via 911 authority membership fees that could be used to fund some statewide initiatives. And this would also use the 911 surcharge funds for that type of purpose. Not all of the purposes that I think CCOA is proposing would be ones that could be funded through this enterprise, such as a lobbyist to represent the 911 stakeholders in legislative matters.
This is Scott. Thanks, Joe, for that. Is there further discussion? And this is Scott again, just to reiterate what Jackie's request is whether or not the legislative committee can continue to work on this, not forwarding it to the legislator now, but continuing to work through these concerns. It is a lot of time and energy that that committee is working and spending on this. So they don't want to spend more time if the task force is outright opposed. So is there any opposition for the committee to continue on this work? For myself personally, I think this is very valuable. I'm not trying to dismiss the concerns. I think they're valid concerns, but I think that's the purpose of the committee, is to continue to try and work through those. So see, Carl, you have your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it's more of an issue of timing, because if this is going to move forward, I would think that they need permissions fairly soon to get it to the legislature, or at least McCluskey.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Carl. It's a good point. Jackie, do you know when we have a drop dead date to get this to the legislature?
This is Jackie. Normally, it's preferable to have a legislator in place with support by November before their January start date. So, I mean, we could work on this more, tweak it more, and bring it back to see in November, if the task force would like us to move forward with the legislation, giving us another vote, or we can include that in this vote.
And this is Daryl. I just want to clarify too, Representative McCluskey has already seen the first draft of this. If the task force doesn't want to move forward with it, and that's what's transmitted to her, I doubt she will do anything with it or want to do anything with it. So I think the task force is in the driver's seat as to whether this moves forward or not. But I did want to make clear that she has already seen a draft of it.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Daryl. So Jackie, do you see our next meeting is on November 10th? I realize that that's pushing the wire. Would that be too late, do you think? Do you think that would be acceptable based on your work with her in the past?
I think it would be difficult to get it as one of her first 5 at that point. Or find someone else who may want to carry it as their first 5.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Jackie. So based on that, would you like to amend the request then that the legislative committee, if I'm hearing you right, and please let me know if this is incorrect, but that the legislative committee continues to work on this with the goal being that it would be a final form submitted to McCluskey no later than, I guess, November 1st or October 31st. And if that is the case, if the final form can be communicated out to the task force via email before that is submitted, we would not be able to take a formal vote. It's about to be over email, but the task force could be informed of what that final form is. Is that a fair summation?
This is Jackie. Yes, I think that's fair. In addition, with the rumor of DPS having a bill, I have a note to reach out to Representative McCluskey to see what she knows about it.
Thank you, Jackie.
This is Daryl. I also want to point out that our bylaws do allow us to take votes by email if necessary between the meetings.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Daryl, for clarifying on that.
So real quick, Scott, this is Andrew. Jackie, even if we push it to October 31st, is that getting too close to the wire?
This is Jackie. It is getting close to the wire, but it probably.
So my question would be, because this draft legislation has been in existence for a while and folks have had, especially those who have heartburn about it, have had the opportunity to look through, are there any recommendations for changes that should be considered that the legislative committee could go back and work on? Or no? If there aren't any specific recommendations, then I would propose we just vote to go ahead and present this to Representative McCluskey. If there are even just some vague ideas of things that folks would like to consider, then yes, let's get this back to the legislative committee, work through it a little bit more and see if we can push something together very quickly. But I don't want this to sit and languish because we're kicking the can down the road when we don't have a game plan. So that's my only recommendation.
Thank you, Andrew.
So this is Scott. So based on that, Andrew, are you willing to make that a motion?
I will, yeah.
Well, I think this is Mandy. To your point, Andrew, that I'd go back to LEDA and to GARCO. And essentially the question is are there any proposed language changes that would change your stance and be in favor of this? And if that answers no, then put it before the entire task force to vote.
That's my thought. And if that's putting folks on the spot, then I don't necessarily want to do that. And if we need to delay this by a couple weeks, then maybe that would make sense. But I don't want to push this back when it's just because of legitimate but just general discomfort with this.
This is Scott. Thanks, Andrew. Joe and Kimberly, I see you both have your hand up, but real quick, because we'll go to discussion. Andrew, can you repeat your motion then for the purposes of the group and for the minutes so we know exactly what the motion is?
So I guess my motion would be, do we go ahead and, so I guess my motion is, let's go ahead and vote on this for submittal to Representative McCluskey to start working through the process. I guess that's the motion. The alternative would be taking some more time to work through some specific language changes that folks would like to explore and convening the legislative committee, even if it's additional special meetings to work through that to see if we can get a little more buy-in, because I don't think that is wasted time. But I just want to make sure that we're moving with purpose.
Thank you, Andrew, for clarifying. And so, Joe, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, my question is, if we're submitting it to Representative McCluskey, once at some point, the legislative drafters start working on it, and they're always, for example, the last legislation we had to create the 911 surcharge was supposed to allow some of the funds to be used for these purposes, and that's why we're looking at this new legislation. When do we start working with the legislative drafters and have the opportunity, then to say, yes, this works for us, or no, this makes it unworkable? And maybe if we can do that, at this point, we should go forward and start on it and then come back and look at the bill in its final form. Jackie, do you know when the legislative drafters will start working on this?
This is Jackie. Yeah, that my brain was kind of trying to form my response. Anyway, yes, normally from the past bill that we got through, once the legislator took it, they put it through drafting, and drafting usually starts after the session starts. Sometimes, and what we saw happen with the last bill that we did get passed and why we didn't get what we absolutely wanted was because of rules we didn't understand or know about intimately. I mean, we knew about them, but not enough to understand what they meant. And so, yes, in that drafting process, changes get made kind of fast and furious, and there are and have been a small group of people from the legislative committee that would be on that committee to then kind of go back and forth with the draft legislation to make sure it has what we need. And like I said, in the past, the last legislation we did get passed, that did happen. There were a lot of last minute kind of changes. Some of them were not very substantive, but they were in order to get buy-in from telecom and that kind of thing. So there's always going to be those back and forths during the drafting process. And normally that's a smaller group that handles those. And so the vote from the task force basically said, yes, let's move forward. Let's get the legislation involved. And the legislative committee then takes the reins with all the details and concerns.
This is Scott. So thank you, Jackie, for the additional detail. So in light of that, is there any other discussion before we consider Andrew's proposal? Or his motion, I should say?
Scott, this is Daryl, just as a matter of formality, I think it would be good to ask for a second and then ask for discussion.
Well, thank you, Daryl. You're absolutely correct. Can I get a second for Andrew's motion?
This is Jeff Irvin, JCCA, I second.
Thank you, Jeff, for the second. And is there any discussion regarding that motion?
John Cummings with a question.
Yes, John, go ahead.
So Jackie, I believe your original request was to bring it back to the committee. Are there things that you believe need to be clarified before this is ready to roll?
This is Jackie, and the committee has had numerous discussions, and it was my understanding at our last committee that we did tweak it the best we could to get a draft. And if anyone's on the committee that feels they have more to add, then I would like them to speak up.
And this has got hearing no additional input. Do you have a question in the chat to repeat the motion? So Andrew, one more time, if you could please repeat the motion for the group.
Motion to vote on moving forward with presenting this draft legislation to, I suppose, Representative McCluskey.
Thank you, Andrew. And that was seconded by Jeff Irvin from JCECA. Any other discussion before we go to a vote? Okay, then we'll move to the vote. All opposed, please indicate if you are opposed to the moving forward with this motion.
Scott, this is Kimberly on behalf of Lita. We would like to be recorded as opposed.
This is Scott. Thank you, Kimberly. Any others? Okay, hearing none. This is Scott Still. Thank you again, Kimberly, for speaking up. Holly, if you would please note in the minutes that Lita has objected, but has otherwise passed the vote to move this forward to the state legislature for further consideration. With that, we will move on to our next item. Daryl, by the way, I've checked. I still do not see Fred has joined the call. So we'll move on to the 988 report from Kelly Bowman, if Kelly is on the call.
Can we ask real quick, is Fred, are you in the room? Are you Fred?
Yes.
Okay, so our presenter is here. I don't know if we want to pause for that presentation.
Why don't you just keep going and then I'll do cleanup.
Okay, Fred has offered to let us keep going with the standing reports and he can go after that.
And this is perfect. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
No problem.
So Kelly, if you have a 988 report, please.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and give a quick update. We actually just met with our 988 Enterprise Board this morning to talk about budget projections for an 18-month period covering the last 2 quarters of FY23 and FY24. Previously for 988, we had actually worked on a budget that was through the calendar year that made contracting a little bit difficult for anyone who's ever had to deal with the state contracting cycle. So we are working on an 18-month budget to get approved and then send a memo out to the PUC to help us with the surcharge, recognizing that there's going to be some significant changes in performance expectations by the mid-year 2024 with speed of answer for our call center. So we know that that's going to have a pretty significant impact on staffing and operations at our call center. And so we are just trying to look at some of our baseline data and to anticipate needs. We are very excited and proud in Colorado that we have performed extremely well since 988 launched July 16th this year. We have had over a 90% in-state answer rate within 59 seconds, which is actually above what the SAMHSA performance expectations currently are. And then we have not seen a significant spike in call volume for 988 calls. Anecdotally, I will say that there's been higher acuity to the calls that we've seen. We kind of attribute that to 988 historically being a suicide prevention lifeline. And so most of the folks who are more familiar with that service, it's related to the suicide prevention world. So it's not terribly concerning that we've seen higher acuity. It really hasn't had much of an impact on mobile services yet, but we do expect as we build out additional services, continue to build capacity, and then launch a public-facing campaign in summer of 2023 that we expect that there to be much higher utilization. And so over the next year at least, we are going to be working very collaboratively, establishing a 988 911 work group. We were part of one of 5 states that actually had participated in the SAMHSA Policy Academy for 988 and 911 system integration. Daryl, I'll kind of let you share whether or not you think that that was a fantastic use of everyone's time, but it was at least a great level set of where we kind of need to go in creating local momentum in building trust and collaboration between 988 and 911, specifically looking at transfer protocols for PSAPs to get calls over to RMCP. And this has obviously been an ongoing conversation. Many of you have been part of the public safety group over the last several years. So we will be continuing to build on that work so we're not reinventing the wheel, as well as building from other standard operating procedures that have been in existence. So that is more to come in the next year. But I think overall, we're super excited that our call center is performing very well. We are considered right now a top 10 state. And so we are just kind of looking forward to ongoing conversations now that we've made it through launch on how to actually engage in program improvement and invest in community resources. So I'll take a quick pause because I tend to talk really fast and share a lot of information. So if there's any questions about 988, I'll go ahead and answer anything for the task force.
This is Scott. Thank you, Kelly. I think this is our first time getting the update from you, so we do appreciate you joining. I do think going forward, this is going to be very helpful to hear your initiatives and efforts and how your program is proceeding at the state level and how 911 might be able to partner with you. So really appreciate you attending and providing us your updates on that. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Kelly?
This is Daryl. I just wanted to comment too that the EZNet users group, which is meeting next Wednesday, will also be discussing making sure that that 911 centers have an ability through the EZNet to transfer 911 calls to the crisis hotline center. The crisis hotline center can't receive them on the internet or on the EZNet, but to be able to transfer calls into the public switch telephone network to go to the crisis center. I think we need to make sure that all the 911 centers have that ability. And thank you, Kathy, for bringing that up as well.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Daryl, for adding that as well. So we will move on. I know that the next item is the Equal Access Committee. I did double check. I don't see Cheryl on the call still. She was not at the beginning, so I don't know. Daryl, Holly, did she provide any written update prior to the meeting?
Yeah, so Cheryl did, and I think Holly's got it. Do you have it up to read?
Sure, this is Holly. I'll read Cheryl's update that she provided, but first I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Equal Access Committee had discussed in our July meeting. So there was a lot of discussion around what the goals of the Equal Access Subcommittee should be and how we can actually achieve those goals. So I'm going to give you kind of a summary of some of the items that we had discussed with input from the task force. We agreed that while monthly meetings are informative and provide beneficial information, that the committee has become more of an information sharing group rather than carrying out a goal of the task force. So to determine what the subcommittee should focus on, we would like to ask the task force, as well as access and functional need communities, what they want to see achieved by this subcommittee. Based on the feedback from the task force and access and functional need communities, the subcommittee should set goals for what it wants to achieve and use these metrics to determine how goals will be met. There is sometimes a misunderstanding from access and functional needs communities on how to use 911. So one of the thoughts was the subcommittee should collaborate with local disability and access and functional need groups to determine what type of trainings, workshops, webinars would be beneficial to increase the awareness of how best to use 911. We also agreed that monthly meetings should be recorded and stored in a place where both access and functional need groups, as well as 911 authorities and representatives, can have access for watching in the future. And we wanted to determine if meeting less frequently would increase subcommittee participation. The subcommittee has 36 members, but regular attendance is down to about 8 to 10 people per month. So that is kind of what I wanted to open up to the task force. It feels a little odd having this conversation without Cheryl here. I do believe that this subcommittee is going in a direction where it's losing some of its focus around 911 and how people with disabilities interact with 911 and emergency services. And so I would like to personally see some direction from the task force on what they want to see the subcommittee doing. One of the biggest recent effort that was made was bringing to the EZNet group, asking the EZNet group to consider whether text to 911 should be included in the tariff. And we did a lot of outreach with local disability organizations talking about statewide text to 911. And we had over 30 different organizations sign on to adding text to 911 as part of the EZNet. So that was the last effort that I felt like we had done that's specifically related to 911 and people with disabilities. And I just want to keep that subcommittee on track. and make sure that we're doing things that the task force wants to see done rather than just hosting speakers and presentations. So that's kind of my update on that task force, or on that subcommittee, and would love to hear from folks in the room or on the call about what they would like to see done with that subcommittee.
Daryl, this is Jeff.
Jeff?
So the impetus, for the committee originally was the push for text to 911, and we've made, I think, great progress with regard to that across the state. It might be interesting to review what holes exist now, and would that be a continued goal, and is it needed in a tariff at this point? Where do we stand?
Yes. I don't have an easy way to get to the map, but there's a map on the 911 program webpage showing which counties still don't have text to 911, and we're down to 11 911 authorities out of the 56 that don't have text to 911. With Gilpin has it at one of its two PSAPs, but not the other one. So there are still some holes, mostly in southeast Colorado, but in a few other places as well. Text to 911 is also a topic that is being discussed monthly by the EZNet users group, because it's one of the things that the EZNet users group has asked Lumen to provide some thoughts on as to whether that could be included in the tariff and how it would be included in the tariff. One of the discussions that keeps being had, that's been had more than once in the EZNet users group, is whether that should be a service that is provided as a standard part of the tariff, or if it should be an optional service. I think opinion has kind of gone back and forth on that a little bit. So we'll see where that ends up. But I know that the resource center as well has been reaching out to the 911 authorities that still don't have any text to 911 functionality for their residents, and trying to find out if there are obstacles that the resource center can help with as well. So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach, but I would say that it is still a high priority. We don't want anybody in Colorado to need text to 911 and get a bounce back message if that can be avoided at any cost or by any measure.
And I don't know that money is so much the issue as it is this perception that somehow adding it creates an additional, insurmountable burden for an ECC or a PSAP. And perhaps if the committee could focus on somehow outreach and providing information that would help them overcome that, I guess, fear of that might help.
And this is Daryl, having been part of the conversations with Connie too, and Connie, you can chime in if you have something to add from the resource center, because I know she's been reaching out to these 911 authorities that still don't have text to 911. I don't know that perception that suddenly you're going to get an avalanche of text calls if you activate text to 911 is still out there, because every center that has implemented text to 911 has said that that's not the case, that they get a trickle of text to 911 calls instead of a flood. But I think sometimes just the steps that you have to go through to implement it is sometimes what stops a center, especially these small centers where the person who's managing the PSAP is wearing multiple hats. I think that is frequently the obstacle. And cost is a little bit of a factor now, because there is no longer a free option for text to 911 like there used to be with Comtech's 911 GEM solution. Now that there is no free solution out there, the cost does have to factor in some way.
This is Connie.
Connie, go ahead.
I have had the pleasure of speaking with individual dispatchers and managers and supervisors with the centers that do not have it. Have been successful in, I believe Crowley County has text to 911. But in answering their questions, there's been a lot of fear, not so much that they're going to get so many, but that they don't have the resources in their county to be able to receive this. And one by one, I'm trying to dispel those rumors and encourage and guide as best I can. for them to get the text to 911?
And this is Daryl. You know, one potentially free option that still exists is that you could make an arrangement with another 911 center that already has text to 911 to take text to 911 for your county and then relay those calls to you. And since there are so few of them, especially in the rural areas, you know, that typically would not represent a huge burden on the 911 center that's taking them, or a huge number of calls that have to be relayed by telephone to the center that's actually going to be dispatching resources to those calls. So I hope that people still take that into account as a possibility as well.
And this is Connie again. Watching yesterday with the iPhone, the new iPhone coming up, and there was also mentioned that T-Mobile is talking about the satellite connection. They expressly, in both that I observed, spoke about, does that 911 center, are they able to take text to 911? So it's going to be another resource that I can tap into as I talk to them.
Thank you, Connie.
This is Joe Benkert. I wonder if for those counties that don't have it and have concern with the impact of on the resources of getting text 911, if there's a nearby PSAP that has text 911, if they could invite them to come visit and kind of see an in-person demo and talk to the people who are in fact handling text messages if they're getting them, if that could help.
Joe, this is Connie again, and thank you for that suggestion. I will use it.
This is Daryl. I think that's a very good idea. You know, at our last task force meeting, I asked if there were volunteers to help reach out to those remaining 911 authorities that don't have text to 911. And thank you, Lita, for stepping up to that. We didn't have any other takers though. But if we reach out directly to the neighbors of some of the 911 authorities that still don't have text to 911, maybe that would be a good resource. So I think that's a good idea, Joe.
Daryl. This is Bruce Romero with Rapid SOS.
Hi, Bruce.
Just for a little background, I know that Monica, before she left, was working with Pitkin County to take on calls for text call messages for some of the neighboring agencies, including Lake County. Prowers County in the southeast corner was willing to take on quite a few agencies in that area. I think there were some communication issues because of busyness in the ECCs in the southeast. But then I know Lake and Pitkin County ran into a problem with Entrado trying to separate the 911 call routing function and the text routing function, and we're having some difficulty with that piece of it. So when Connie gets into some of those situations, maybe reach out to Kimberly and see how they did that as far as bringing in Grand Junction and Garfield into their routing for text, because it seemed to be a little bit of a holdup with the Entrado piece.
Thank you, Bruce. My understanding is with Prowers County, there was discussion of them taking text 911 calls because it's not on the webcast, but the people in the room can see the map right now. It shows the counties in red around them, but my understanding is they got too busy. The PSAP manager there got too busy to continue the discussion. So maybe that's something that could be picked up again.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Kimberly, and it really wasn't a huge problem, just had to do with GIS shapefiles and sending that to the TCCs. So happy to help anybody that is needing some assistance there.
Thank you, Kimberly. So this is Daryl. I would suggest, because Connie, as the director of the resource center, has been reaching out to these counties and trying to coordinate. So I would suggest that we continue that. And if anybody has, wants to be a spokesperson for text 911 and talk to these counties, to allay their fears or help walk them through their options, I would suggest reaching out to Connie and letting her know that you're available for that.
So back to the original question, Daryl, I think, yes, we do need to keep the outage committee alive, and that there's still a mission for them to accomplish.
The Equal Access Committee, you mean, Jeff?
Or yeah, I'm sorry, the Equal Access Committee.
And this is Daryl, some suggestions for future things that the Equal Access Committee might do is I could see them maybe reaching out to some of the 911 authorities to see what training they have for their employees regarding equal access and providing service to callers with access and functional needs, and seeing if maybe there's some support that needs to be provided in that area as well in terms of training. My guess is that, like a lot of things, some 911 centers have the resources to provide that training already, and some 911 centers may not have those resources and maybe could use some assistance.
And Daryl, I'd also say that, we can't keep on top of all the evolving technology and apps and what have you. So any kind of update that they could provide on what's coming or what's out there or what we need to know would be very helpful.
Thank you, Jeff. And I would like to do for our full task force presentations, either at a task force meeting or in the lunch and learns that we have in the off months, maybe that could be a topic of an upcoming meeting or upcoming presentation.
This is Scott. Any other comments, or Holly, were they able to answer your question?
Sure.
Ish.
There was about 75 people on this call, and I do feel a little disappointed sometimes that it's the same 6 people who are providing so much insight to this task force. I honestly, I guess that's the goal of having such a big group, is to get a lot of insight. And this isn't just with the Equal Access Committee, this is with a lot of things. Daryl and about 5 people essentially are running this task force that has hundreds of people on it. So I don't mean to, to cause any issues, but I really think folks need to start stepping up with ideas and feedback that you have. Daryl and the 4 or 5 people that run this task force cannot do everything. And the point of having everybody on this task force is to get your insight and wisdom that you have in the 911 field. So I'm sure it feels very frustrating to send out draft proposals, draft legislation, surveys, and to get very minimal response. And so I just want to encourage people to really start stepping up and becoming active members of this task force. Showing up every other month just to have a quorum is not enough. And so I apologize if that feels a little bit out of place or out of line for me to say that, but as commission staff and as this is on the commission to see this task force operational, we need 911 authorities and representatives to step up. And if you know who I'm talking about, if you're the one who's doing all the work, and I'm sure that you also feel some of that burden on you. So I will leave it on that, but just please consider the work that you're doing within this task force, because it is a lot of work and it should not be on the shoulders of 10 people when we have 30 voting members and 100 plus individuals who regularly attend. So I'll turn it back over to you, Scott.
This is Daryl. Can I add something? I just want to flip that around a little bit. I understand the difficulty of actively participating in everything at the state level when you're running 911 centers and governing bodies. I mean, that is more than a full-time job right there. And I think that makes it challenging to fully participate sometimes in other types of activities, whether it's the task force or the NENA APCO chapter or anything at the state level. So, flipping that around a little bit, if there is anything that we can do, because it is, it's in commission rules that commission staff is supposed to administer the task force. If there's anything we can do to help facilitate your participation, let us know. If there's ways that we can make it easier for you to participate, let us know, rather than make it, more kind of an accusatory thing. Make it just let us know what we can do to help you participate. And I'm very open to that input and feedback.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Daryl and Holly, both for that. Holly, I don't think you need to apologize first off, because we can't solve a problem if A, we don't know about it, and B, if we don't talk about it. So I'm glad that you brought it forward. I would guess, I don't think I can make a motion, but I would propose that as the task force representatives, we look through this list of committees and all the current initiatives that are underway and come back in November to be able to discuss how maybe we can have better contribution or better participation. And I apologize, Patty, I missed it. I see that you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, it's something that I've said in the past. I think that there is also a reluctance on the part of some people because they lack an understanding. They feel like if they would get involved in something that, especially some of these technical committees, it can be really overwhelming. And I think even some of the people that are on the committee, you continue to learn as you engage. So it's something that I don't know how we overcome that, because it's only going to get more complicated in a lot of these areas, other than to just encourage people to sign up for something, even if you don't think you have the full knowledge or understanding, with the hopes that somehow, through osmosis or attending those meetings, you can get that kind of insight to be able to participate on a committee more fully. But it is something that it is another topic that I don't always think that we talk about. I think there's areas that come up in the meetings, and there are a lot of people that don't even understand what we're talking about, but are either, nervous or embarrassed to say, hey, wait a minute, I don't even understand what you're talking about. So just a comment.
And this is Daryl, having been attending task force meetings in one form or another for over a decade now. I think participation waxes and wanes. I think the task force is actually a lot more active now than it used to be in a number of ways. But that doesn't mean there's not room for improvement either. So I think, the more we can get everyone involved, and the more people feel free to speak up and provide their input and ideas, I think the better off we'll be.
And this is Scott. So any thoughts then on, maybe that's an open agenda item for our November meeting to talk about how we could address some of these? I think, Patty, your point is well made, because sometimes folks do, just based on the nature of attrition or turnover in their agency, they step into the middle of the task force as things are going on. I mean, just today we have a couple new names that are participating, and so they're hearing about these things that have been in flight for some of them for quite a period of time. So is there any thoughts, or just in general, is that a good idea? What do you think that we come back maybe in the November meeting as an open agenda item to just talk about how we could help facilitate, to Daryl's point, maybe facilitate some better participation, help bring people up to speed, and really highlight maybe the areas that we are needing the assistance in some of these committees? Because also, to Daryl's point, I think some of the committees ebb and flow. Sometimes they're very, very active for a long period of time, and then other times they slow down. They don't have a lot of activity, whereas other committees pick up. And Kimberly, I see you have your hand up.
This is Kimberly. Thank you, Scott. Just one item I want to encourage. I do think it should be discussed in an agenda item in November, but I also wanted to encourage all of the non-911 members of the 911 task force to consider chairing a committee or stepping into that leadership role within the task force. It's typically PUC staff or the 911 committee members that are taking on these initiatives, and your participation from a carrier side is what makes the task force so incredibly valuable. It's the partnership between industry and 911. So I just wanted to encourage everyone else outside of 911 that attends the task force meetings to help us and chair the committees, attend the committees, maybe even take a leadership role within this committee.
And
This is Scott. Thank you for that, Kimberly. I'm sorry, somebody else is speaking.
yeah, thanks, Scott. This is Andrew. The one thing that I will add is, having been in my role for just over 2 years now, it's very recent memory of trying to get up to speed with a lot of stuff that folks have been doing as a part of this task force and the various committees for decades. And the biggest resources were people like Bruce Romero, Kimberly Culp, Matt Gage, Daryl, of just having conversations with them, getting some of the background and the history. And maybe that's something that we can do as a task force, is making sure that those lines of communication are open. But for folks that are just joining us due to attrition and retirements and whatnot, reach out to the individuals that you hear speaking on these meetings, because there is an awful lot of subject matter expertise and historical knowledge. And that's certainly been the biggest asset for me in the last couple of years.
This is Daryl. Something that occurs to me is that for people who have come into Colorado or come into a leadership position, even if they've always been in Colorado, just haven't been exposed to this stuff before, don't know how the tariff works, or don't know the role of the task force, or don't know what the committees do, maybe having a training day that people could participate in, developed by the old timers like us, some of us anyway, to help bring them up to speed. Maybe that would be very helpful. I don't know.
Jody, this is Jody. You just described me to a T in terms of coming into a management position within the last year. And as a supervisor, I didn't even know this existed. I have a couple of my supervisors in the room now that are on the supervisor team that have messaged me and said, I'm interested in this and this and this already, just from being here for a few minutes. So I think, we have the list of all the committees, and some of them are obvious, what happens in those committees and what kinds of things they do. But if I could take that to, supervisor team and say, hey, these are the lists of committees, this is what they do, what kinds of things are you interested in? We could branch it out that way. Because I'm still wrapping my brain around, having sat in and never spoken in any one of the meetings, but having sat in and tried to at least participate after the fact of the conversations, not knowing what to ask and not knowing how things work, what the intricacies are, then we can branch out within our PSAPs and find one of the few individuals that would be very interested in.
And Daryl, this is Scott. For the benefit of the folks on the call, if you can, could you try to summarize that? It was really difficult to hear.
Sorry. I could, so in summary, basically, if we can have a list of the committees and what kinds of things they do, or if there's a list that exists already, that would be great, so we can branch out and find interested parties within our PSAPs that want to focus on one specific area.
Scott, were you able to hear that?
And this, Scott, thank you, Daryl. Yes, I was. And I appreciate that suggestion. I was having a similar thought myself.
And there's a list of all of the committees on the task force webpage with descriptions of them. It doesn't necessarily go into a lot of detail, but that might be a starting point. So I can send that out to the listserv again so that people have that link. And then if anybody has questions about what any of the committees do or how often they meet, I'm happy to try to answer those. But I do think, Scott mentioned, maybe reviewing that list of committees at our next task force meeting, seeing if that list needs to change at all. I think that's a good idea to just do every once in a while anyway, because our needs might change and maybe some committees aren't needed anymore and some committees we need, but we don't have. So we don't want people participating in committees that they don't feel are worthwhile, because then burnout becomes a real thing. So Scott, it's 13 minutes after noon.
I'm so sorry, but could I just add to this conversation before we take a break?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this is Scott. I'm sorry, Jennifer, that's what I was going to suggest, Daryl, is there's a couple more hands up. Why don't we do that and then we'll take the break for lunch. So with that, Jennifer, go ahead.
This is Jennifer Kirkland, and I think this is a fascinating conversation that really needed to happen. And I know that we're in the PUC task force conversation, and I don't want to derail it, but speaking to all the different things that we've been talking about today, and also in the task force, and also having been a veteran of trying to do outreach for multiple things in 911 across the state. I would love to see this grow into something big along the lines of, I'm sorry, I didn't know who was speaking in the room, but it would be nice to have maybe through the resource center office or website, or maybe through the board that gets built if the legislation discussed earlier happens. But 911, when we have new leaders come in, or when we have comm centers who are able to participate because their staffing gets better and they're small, it would be nice to have a clearinghouse of something that described all of the different things that are going on in 911 in Colorado. Here's Colorado NINA, and this is what they do, and this is how to get involved with that. And here's the PUC task force, and this is what they do, and here's their website, and here's how to get involved with that. And the Training Standards Institute, and the CCOA, and whatever else we're all doing. I just think that, you know, we do have a core group of active people in the state, which I think is wonderful. And to Holly's point, I think the more people who we get on board to help out, then the more diverse our voices are, and the better we can really represent all the different facets of 911 in the state. But it's a big lift. And so I don't know if it's, you know, the PUC working in conjunction with CCOA, working in conjunction with the Resource Center, working in conjunction with APCO or NINA APCO. But I'd love to see it be comprehensive, and also find a way to get the information out to the centers that don't participate. And with everything being virtual now, there's just, aside from staffing, which we all deal with, you know, there's no reason to be an island of 911 in Colorado because we have such a strong and engaged community.
This is Scott. Thank you, Jennifer. This is very, very well stated. Joe, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I just say very quickly, because I know we want to get to the break, that you know, in participating on committees, it's helpful to have representatives of various jurisdictions who do things their own ways, so that we understand the impact of any programs or initiatives of the committee, how they're going to affect different people. Bretzel files comments in just about every FCC proceeding that it impacts 911. And in doing that, you know, in the past, I've talked to Kimberly, I've talked to Matt Getch, you know, people I know in different areas, try and understand the different impacts of, you know, comments we make, and to make sure nothing we're saying to benefit, you know, would impact Brett's in the good part, or the way we think it would best serve 911. We're not doing things that would undermine or harm other authorities, especially in Colorado, in the way that they operate. And it's helpful to have that interchange and understand. And I would think it would also help authorities, PSAP personnel, even get fresh ideas from what somebody else does that might help them tweak the way they operate to improve. So I think it's a win-win situation when we get more full participation.
Thank you, Joe. And this is Scott. I think, again, in the interest of time, again, all these have been great input, I believe, and a lot of good discussion on it. So I would propose that we come back in the November meeting. In the meantime, if you all can put together your thoughts in just a bullet list of what you'd like to see, and we can have a further discussion in the November meeting, and kind of take an approach to how we start tackling that and fold it all together. If that sounds good to everybody, I don't know that we need a formal vote, but if that sounds good to everybody, then we can make that part of the agenda for the November meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Again, great discussion. And thank you, Holly, for bringing it up. So Daryl, as to your point, we are running late. Why don't we take, is the food there in the room? Should we take 15? Should we take 20?
I'm cognizant of the fact that we still haven't done our presentation yet, and our presenter has been waiting patiently in the back of the room. So I would suggest we take 10 minutes just to get our food and get sit down, and then maybe we can plow through the rest of these standing reports and then get to the presentation.
And this is Scott. Thanks, Daryl. So we will take a 10-minute break and circle back here at 12:28. Thank you, everybody.
Excuse me, Daryl?
Yes.
This is Riel, one of the interpreters. I just want to let you know that Billy came on screen and told us that he needed to leave and for the interpreters not to stay. So just so you know, we're going to go ahead and get off the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I just didn't want you to come back from lunch and wonder if there's a tech problem or something. So thanks for having us.
Understood. Thank you.
And this is Scott again. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please make your way back to your seats, we'll get started in about a minute. And this is Scott again. All right, it's 12:28. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Daryl, the outage committee report.
Thanks. Everybody in the room, we're getting started again. Outage committee, in the interest of time, I'm going to be very brief. We haven't had a lot of changes to the dashboard. The dashboard is available by a link on the task force website. If you look at outages as of today's date, as compared to previous years, we're actually below where we were in 2020 and 2021, so that's good. Just as a caveat, as usual, this includes basic emergency service outages only, and it includes ones that have been closed, because sometimes we think something's a basic emergency service outage, and by the end we determine that it's not. So we only include the ones that have been confirmed as basic emergency service outages. If you look at when those outages occurred this year, we had 2 in March, 1 in April, 2 in May. We have not had any since then, knocking on wood. And the other statistics really haven't changed much. The duration of the outages is higher this year than previous years, but the number of customers affected is lower than in previous years. As far as causes go, we've got 40% due to cable cuts, usually due to construction or something along those lines. 20% due to wildlife, which is really a cable cut, but it's a cable cut caused by a marmot instead of a backhoe. System failure is 20%, so that's usually like a card that's gone bad or something along those lines, and one where the cause could not be determined. So that's listed as unknown. One thing I did want to point out is that the consensus rules that are currently being considered in the rulemaking would call for an investigation process to be conducted by commission staff. So if those rules pass in their current form, commission staff will be taking these over. So it'll still be me, but it'll be me in my role as a commission staff member instead of my role as chair of the outage committee. The outage committee itself will still have a role and participate in those investigations. But I did want to point out that it would be more appropriate if somebody else was chair of the outage committee if that happens. So be thinking about that. If the rules pass in their current form, I will likely be stepping down as chair of the outage committee. So be thinking about if that's something that would interest you, and if you would like to step into that position. And to the discussion we were just having, thank you, Holly. It would be good if we get somebody who hasn't participated in a whole lot of things or isn't already chairing other committees, so that we can kind of diversify our participation and our points of view. And I'm able to answer any questions you may have about the outage committee if you have them at this time.
Would that position be open to vendors?
It could be open, so you do not have to be a voting member to chair a task force. So I think, you know, when I step down from that position, Scott will probably call for volunteers to nominate themselves, and if we have multiple nominees, we can vote on it, but otherwise, Scott actually has the ability to appoint committee chairs.
Thank you.
This is Scott. Thanks, Daryl. So I will be taking gifts for anybody who does not want to be appointed. Kidding, of course, I'm kidding. But yes, thank you for that, Daryl. And that is great follow on to our last discussion for folks to be thinking about at the upcoming meeting. Any other questions for Daryl? Okay, then we will move on to prepaid and collections. Jackie Louise.
This is Jackie. We will be meeting in October and have a report for the task force in November. And in light of our previous conversation, which I think is very valuable, I think that part of our agenda will be what functions does this committee need? Does it need to change or be something different? Thanks.
This is Scott. Thank you, Jackie. We look forward to the report in November. Daryl, back to you for the reports committee.
State of 911 report is being voted on by the commission on September 14th. It has to be transmitted to the General Assembly by the 15th, so we're cutting it close, but we had to give the commissioners time to review the draft report. So I'll let you know when that has been approved. The task force report to the commission, we do every other meeting, and this is not one of the meetings we do it at, so there's no report due today for a vote.
This is Scott. Thank you, Daryl. Any questions for Daryl? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to ESI Net Users Group. Tina Powell.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Again, this is Tina Powell. I just have a few quick updates. Daryl did run the last meeting for me as I was unavailable. So Daryl, if there's anything else you want to add, just let me know. I believe as far as the status of the ESI net migration, we only have one more military installation, Schrieber, to complete. That project is temporarily on hold just while they work through a few on-site items. As Daryl mentioned earlier, the tariff amendment for ECATS has been filed and is moving through that process. Regarding the new area code overlay and the 10-digit dialing, we're down to 2 locations. Actually, is there anybody on right now from Huerfano County? Does anybody have a contact at Huerfano?
Tina, this is Connie, and I have been in contact with them. What can I pass on?
If you can just send whoever their contact information is to me, we just need to get somebody in contact with them about their 10-digit dialing status.
This is Wes. They have a new director over there, and Connie, you know, if you have the contact, there are actually 2 folks, but yeah, I can help there too.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It kind of, I almost get ping pong between those 2.
Yeah. How about you and I catch up later on, and I think we can resolve this real fast after the meeting.
Sounds good, Wes. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And the other location is DAA, and they're working on some CPE equipment, but with them being a transfer PSAP, theirs isn't as important, but still need to resolve the issue. The Alley hardware update is complete, so that will no longer be on our agenda. Tim Kunkelman with Lumen is still working on a diagram that the EZNet committee had requested on some default call routing, so we're just waiting on that update. And then I believe Daryl sent out some information to authorities and PSAPs on the T-Mobile statewide form that everybody can fill out for the location-based routing request. Daryl, did I miss anything?
I think you covered it well.
Okay, that's all I have.
This is Scott. Thanks, Tina. Any other questions for Tina? All right, hearing none, then we will move on. I see that Matt Gage is up next for the GIS committee. He posted here no report. I do not see him on the chat, so, or on the call, I should say. So we'll move forward. Colorado Public Safety Broadband update from Brandy, if Brandy is on the call. I'm not seeing Brandy on the call either. Okay, then we will move on to the PSCS report from Deanie.
Thank you. This is Deanie. Actually, I don't really have much to report on other than our meeting got rescheduled for 1 o'clock today. So I don't have anything to report on.
This is Scott. Thank you, Deanie. Appreciate that. Next up is the SWIC report from Pam Monsees, but I do not see Pam on the call either. Is anybody else from the state available to speak on the SWIC report? Okay, then we will move on to the next item, Division of Fire Prevention and Control report from Connie.
And we have not had a meeting since our last task force meeting. The next meeting is in October, so I have no new information.
Thank you, Connie. And then how about a 911 resource center update?
Well, I kind of already said that earlier with what I've been working on with contacting for text to 911. Right off the top of my head, I hadn't really prepared much other than that. That's what I've been working on most fervently. I have received surveys from almost all of the PSAPs in the state, which is very helpful, particularly in integrating and discussing with 988 and who has what resources for mental health response. And that's what I have.
This is Scott. Thank you, Connie. Were there any questions for Connie for either of those topics? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Connie. I just checked. Next up is Rapid SOS update. I do not see Karen on the call, and it does not look like we had receipt of a report. Is anybody else from Rapid SOS on the call?
Sam's here in person.
I'm sorry, I could barely hear that. Say that again.
Sam from Rapid SOS speaking. I'm here in person.
Great, thanks, Sam. Do you have an update you would like to share with the group?
I do. So Rapid SOS has launched our full alerts platform in the state of Colorado, allowing ECCs to skip the call, the 10-digit call from the alarm company or monitoring center at zero cost from select alarm companies. So if there are anyone who needs that enabled, let me know. We have also
Sam, would you mind coming up here? I don't think people on the phone can probably hear you.
So if you didn't catch that first part, the alerts integration with Rapid SOS allowing you to skip the call from the monitoring center or alarm company is live. All you have to do is request that integration be enabled, and I can walk you through how that works. Second, Axon, our partnership with Axon, where if the 911 center dispatches for a police department who uses Axon body-worn cameras, we have the ability to display the location of the Axon body-worn cameras on the Rapid SOS portal. And that can also be simply enabled, assuming the body cameras meet the minimum specifications to have that enabled. Rapid SOS has a Ready 22 virtual and in-person conference that we're doing November 9th and 10th, both in Dallas and in virtual and on-site satellite locations across the United States. We'll have some keynote speakers, live on-demand training, and a bunch of seminars. We'd love for anyone who is able to attend. We do a quarterly or monthly Tech for 911 live webinar series. We have one coming up on September 28th at noon. You can reserve a seat to that at rapidsos.com. That one's covering threat prevention technology with our VP of Public Safety, Jameson Peavyhouse. We have a virtual tech fair featuring some of our data partners as requested by the 911 centers in Colorado, where myself and a couple other folks, Bruce is also included, will cover the different technologies and data partners that Rapid SOS provides at zero cost and at a cost. But just to make sure that all your questions regarding the Rapid SOS portal at your center are addressed. That one is October 20th. The last Tuesday in October, I believe, is the 25th. And you should receive an invite from that pretty shortly. As always, get the latest updates and information by signing up for the newsletter, where you can get this information that I'm telling you directly. Get that at rapidsos.com/blog. Lastly, as a super quick late addition, as Daryl had mentioned outages and the outage committee, I just want to drive home the importance of having the Rapid SOS portal up and operational in the center, as if your center does go down, your call handling equipment fails or any sort of emergency like that, as we are agnostic of the 911 infrastructure, you will still see your 911 calls appear on the Rapid SOS portal, whether or not they're ringing into your center. That'll conclude my updates.
This is Scott. Thanks, Sam. That was a lot of good info. Are there any questions?
This is Daryl. Just a quick comment. The invite on that October 25th symposium has already gone out, so you should have received that if you're on the task force email list. But we'll be sending out updates and reminders as we get closer to the date as well.
This is Scott. Thanks for that, Daryl, as well. Moving on, the CCOA update from Kimberly Cole.
This is Kimberly. So I have a relatively longer report in here, and it's just to baseline. So hopefully everybody has access to the written report, but just wanted to highlight again what the CCOA is. We are the Colorado Council of Authorities. So we are an association that is formed to be a voice for the 911 authorities in Colorado. So trying to have a unified voice and represent us as a 911 authority voice on rules, surcharge setting, issues at the FCC, and we've had items to tackle this year. So we've been able to go through and tackle those items together. And we currently have 15 members of the CCOA, so it's open to any 911 authority in Colorado that would like to join. And we did decide to waive any of the dues for 2022. So those dues are waived if you want to join. We just have a process for a membership form, and that is included in my written report here. And we did set our dues for 2023. You'll see our dues are set at $175, and we just did it by SIP session since that seems to be the common denominator that we are using. And then that also allows us to size it accordingly. So our smaller authorities are paying less than our larger authorities. Some of the items we're tackling in 2022, again, are listed there. We are participating in that rulemaking. We've had some great representation. We also filed comments in the FCC via NOPR and have been paying attention to other items going on at the state with the surcharge and pending legislation. For 2023, we are working on our website, our logo. We know that there's going to be a diversity plan. If the rules are approved, that's going to call for Lumen to file a diversity plan. And so we'll be participating in that. And then of course, the annual surcharge recommendations. So if you have any questions about the CCOA, how to get involved, what exactly we're doing, please don't hesitate to reach out and send me an email or any of the other CCOA members that are listed there. We're happy to help you. Thanks, Scott.
This is Scott. Thank you, Kimberly. Are there any questions for Kimberly?
This is Daryl. Just to clarify, is that the membership dues, are they $175 per SIP session per year or per month?
Thank you for the question, Daryl. That's going to be per year, not per month.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And this is Scott. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Kimberly. Do we have any old business to discuss? Hearing none, do we have any new business to discuss? Okay, hearing none, we will turn it back over to Fred Miller from the NG 911 Core Services. So Fred, why don't we let you go ahead and start up your presentation?
You can stand up here. I will move the camera so that people can watch you after I get the presentation up. And while we're getting set up, I do want to also thank Fred. NGA 911 provided the lunch today, so thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
Well, oh, there we go.
I'm just getting set up. I don't know if Connie can hear me, but if Connie could add Jessica Tresh to her 988 group in the communication room, right?
Connie, were you able to hear that?
No, I wasn't. I'm sorry.
We'll send her an email.
Okay. Connie, this is Jody. I'll send you an email. I have some people that want to be added to the 988 group.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, you're good.
Hi, I'm Fred Miller. Do you want to move to the next slide?
And by the way, the weirdness in the slide is because I'm doing this on a Chromebook, so it's not his presentation.
So anyway, A lot of you don't know me. I think, you know, in this room, Ken knows me and Jackie knows me. And Jackie's known me for a long time. But I have a long history in 911 and a long history in public safety. I've been doing, working for corporations since 1988, 89, specifically in public companies that all they do is public safety. That's been my whole career, okay? And I handled Colorado several times. I don't have it up there, but I actually was here running around here a lot in 95 and 96. And then later I had territory, I was territory manager. And I was running around here in 2001 to 2004. And then I came back again in 2012 and 2013 through 2013. So, you know, like in 2012, 2013, it was Wes Horn and I running around selling. We were actually selling Sentinel Patriot then, but also, you know, the newer version of the Vesta as it came out. Okay, and then I don't expect that you know who NGA is because we're a fairly new company. All right, we were only incorporated in 2016. The founder of the company had created a little application where the idea was is if you had a kid with a phone, all they got to do was hit one button and it would call everybody that you wanted it to. If they were in trouble, somebody's following it, and that was the idea. And then his next logical step was, how do I get that to 911? And then he started making inquiries, and people were yelling at him because they were like, "You're going to spam us." So, but that wasn't his intent. But anyway, the more he got involved with it, the more he saw an opportunity that, you know, Next Generation for Services wasn't out there yet. He didn't even know what Next Generation for Services was at the time. But anyway, that's how this company started. And we are the Next Generation Core Services provider for LA County, and the whole central region of California. And then we also have ACOG, and I'm not sure if we also have some in West Virginia. Okay. So anyway, that's who NGA is and who I work for. Next slide. Okay, cloud call handling. Does anybody in here or online have any cloud call handling? Okay, so what am I talking about? I'm talking about browser-based call handling solutions. No telephony or processing or call processing is done locally. It's all done in the cloud. All right, and using a cloud hosting service, you know, either Azure, AWS, and there's some other companies that provide those services, but those by far are the two biggest. And those are the two companies that, as far as I know, everybody that's creating in-cloud call handling is using. Okay, we use AWS. Motorola's using Azure. I think, pretty sure Altos is using DWS or AWS as well. But anyway, there's several companies that are doing this, not just us. And you know, we're one of the first ones out the gate. We were one of the first ones that were approved in California. But anyway, there's several companies that do this. It's not just us. All right. And then the way everybody's structuring these are pay it as a service, software as a service. That's what SaaS is. And not a capital. So you know, expenditures match your revenues. All right. It's not, you know, you have to budget for a new system. Okay. You just keep paying it. If you don't like it, you just cut it off and you move on to whatever else you want. Okay. You don't have the problem of you know, heavy client users. All right. Anybody in here that has Vesta or Viper, you have a heavy client, right? And your back room is your server. All right. So you have a client server relationship. This doesn't work like that. It's a browser based. Depending on the company, some companies say you need to use a specific browser, some don't. Okay. So, you know, the UIs are flexible because it's browser based. Nobody can see your data. You can't see their data, the whole 9 yards. Okay. Can we go on to the next one? Right. Another thing about the value of in the cloud processing is that you can access it from pretty much anywhere. Okay, so we are using, you know, basically the same internet service that like Facebook uses. Okay, Facebook is in the AWS cloud, right? I'm not comparing 911 to Facebook, by the way. I'm just saying, you know, access to it is you know, pretty much generally available. And a lot of your access to it is going to be what you're comfortable with as far as security, okay? Depending on the brand or deployment, minimal impact to operations, all right? So I can tell you the vendors that are on the California contract, all of them have signed something that says they're not going to necessarily change anybody's call flow or anything like that, okay? Everybody's still using Genovation keypads. Everybody's still going to give you a single jack so that you can arbitrate between radio and telephone. None of that should change. You shouldn't have to change your call flows, okay? For most PSAPs, it's also going to introduce geodiversity, all right? I know there's a bunch of sites in Colorado where you're sharing systems. You have geodiverse systems, or I think there's hosted systems too, where I think the host is in data centers, right? Jackie's nodding yes, okay. So this is different, all right? So those are data centers. You're still tied to what I like to call an anchor, right? That into that back room with the hosted, in-cloud hosted, you don't have any of that, all right? I already talked about the SaaS expenditures and our geodiversity. So anybody that's got a geodiverse system now, okay, you have 2 instances, okay? That's you know, computer speak of how many replicated services you have, okay? For instance, we have 32 instances in the cloud. So that's like 32 back rooms, okay? That's the value of the cloud, right? Is that it increases in instances, and those instances will be all over the world, okay? They'll be in Hawaii, Oregon, probably Colorado, all over the place, all right? And it leads to high availability, and the security of it is AWS security, all right? Or Azure. Both companies have federal contracts with like Secret Service, and Secret Service, by the way, is the most, as far as any organization that worries about security and testing companies and trying to break into them and watching what's going on out in the world of people trying to do cyber attacks, you don't have that in your agency. You don't have that in your back room, okay? So my point in that is the security of this. There's armed guards at these facilities. There's all types of places where they trap people into them. Okay? I don't know if you call them or you know anybody who knows Monica, she'd probably get you into a data center. So you could just, if you're worried about that, you can see what type of security, physical and cyber security they go through. That you know, as any state and local government, you're not going to match that security level. Okay, can we go to the next one, please? Okay. So you know what it doesn't mean is lack of legacy interfaces. Like I said, we want to change your call flow, keep all the interfaces. Interfaces to CAD will remain the same, and those occur locally. And there are some CAD systems that now are in the cloud as well. And any of those we would also interface to the cloud. So that relationship is going to be up in the cloud versus locally. Okay. And again, that provides higher availability. Okay? Eliminate transition costs. This is far easy to, these systems are far easier to install than legacy systems. For the most part, we're using either little cube PCs or we're using these as well. All right, we can use pads, we can use pretty much any device to run our application. You could walk around with it, you know, in an office with Wi-Fi and take 911 calls if you want to. Okay, again, a lot of that has to do with your comfort on security, but it's possible. It's technically possible. Okay. So encrypted data, secure network protection against data loss. We do all, you know, all of the companies that sign up for this. By the way, I don't know if I explained this, but when that monthly service charge includes, you know, network, whatever you need to make it work, it'll be included in that service charge. All right. So as far as dealing in the case here, if we can reside on, if a company can reside on the ESINet that's deployed here now, they will. And if they can't, then they'll provide their own network in order to support the application and then also interface with the ESINet local. Okay. Offsite redundancy, I pretty much talked about it. Dynamic call routing, that has more to do with NG and next generation core services, but you know we support it. Improve situational awareness. Like I said, you can run this on any device. You can run it on an iPhone, anything, right? You can get that out to officers if you need to. If you have a situation where you're short on staff or you have a major incident, you can hand up devices and say, I need you to take calls, okay? And reduces response times, just, it's faster, these tend to be faster and run more reliable, okay? Can you go to the next one, please? All right, so I was gonna go into this, and you guys actually start talking about how you transition, okay? So, what I'm showing here is basically a legacy network. And Jackie, is there anything that you're doing in Colorado today I'm not taking into account for on that drawing, right? Because you're basically, everybody's attached to a selective router right now, right? No,
we're all on the other net.
you're on, okay, so there's no, are they IP
Well,
selective routers?
The selected router is still there.
Still
We're just-
there.
We're getting it over IP, yeah.
Okay, but the selective router is still routing the call, okay? So you have the selective router and you don't have CAMA, you have a fast EZNet to the PSAP, so that part's wrong. But then on site, you have MIS, your customer premise answering equipment, admin lines, your CAD, your audio logger, right? So can you go to the next one for me, please? Right, so that's all local to you. But when you start looking at cloud, computing, right? Now you're in the cloud and we're taking your MIS, your CPE and your admin lines into the cloud, connecting through the EZNet, all right? We can do that directly if there's next generation core services involved. If not, we can handle a legacy network, and we can handle both, okay? And by the way, when I'm saying we, I'm saying that I don't mean just NGA, I mean those other companies as well, okay? Because everybody's doing this, okay? And then, then what you have locally is, if you need to still have CAMA sit, if you want to keep legacy equipment going, for a while or anything, and CAD, audio logger, reporting ECATs, and SAM is a sound arbitration module. But if you go to the next one. Right, and then in a pure EZNet environment, with next generation core services, we would just ride on that EZNet. Okay, in other words, we would pop right onto it, and it doesn't have to be our EZNet; it could be anybody's EZNet.
So how do you take the admin lines? I'm just curious.
So admin lines, so it depends. So if all your admin lines are provided by like an IP service, like you're paying somebody for a service to provide your admin lines, we probably interface with them in the cloud. Okay. If you're not, then gateways and that type of legacy equipment, return it IP locally, and we should send it up into the cloud.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you want to go to the next one. Right, so this just goes over, physical types of things. So media, if you have TDM, we need to convert to SIP or in direct SIP. Okay, if you have help, so location information, so accessing legacy databases, we would do that. Okay, we would go back and dip into a conventional, a traditional alley dip, and then transfers on net and off net. So you were talking a little bit about that. But that again, when you're looking at companies that are going to provide full next generation core services, there's a transition from the legacy stuff to the new stuff, right? We're going through it right now in California. It's painful, it is, because you have some places that are ready to cut and ready to go, and you have some that aren't, and it takes time, coordination, and you've got to work with vendors that realize that and know that, and will address it with you. Okay. Next one. Okay, and then just a call taking screen, just move on from that. And then the ability to get better analytics. All right, I'm not sure everything you're getting right now for analytics, but for instance, in California, once they transition to next generation core services, they will be able to see stuff into the network. All right, so if you get that call that says it was transferred around 14 times before I got to you, you would be able to go in and look at a dashboard and see that. okay? And that was part of the state requirements for providing that information. But, you know, the thing is you're gonna get better, more complete analytics, and then also they run in real time. Okay? One more. And then reporting, again, you can do, one of the things I used to come across, you know, selling Vesta all the time in the different MIS packages. How do I see what happened in the network? How do I see how long it took for the call to set up? How long do I, you know, and that information was never really available in any report. Is it, Jackie, is it available today in one report? Yeah, but anyway, you know, that's something, you know, especially when you go out to RFP, you know, for this, that's going to be important. You want to make sure you get all that, you know, that you do get your analytics, you know, a full end-to-end analytics type of solution. Okay, and I think there's just one more, which is questions, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, got a question?
I'm just curious, is it cloud only? Do you have on-prem?
We just do cloud.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think,
Sam?
What was the name of the platform itself?
Ours is Nexus.
Nexus.
Our Nexus Connect is really the full name.
so this is Daryl, and, you know, I think one of the big benefits of looking at a solution like this is the lack of big hardware capital costs up front. Are there other types of upfront costs that people should be aware of? Is there setup costs?
Just kind of the equipment that Jackie mentioned. So the setup of you know, terminating, you know, the local lines and putting them up into the cloud. And, you know, we would probably want to install new equipment, but most of you are doing that today anyway. You're just not putting it up to the cloud, you're putting it back to another location, right? So anyway, it's geodiverse. Half of your lines are probably at one site and half are at the other. And that's so that if, you know, Smoking Crater happens, you know, you're still up and running at least at some of your resources. So it's very similar to that.
And then, have you seen, this might be a difficult one to answer, but have you seen any uptick in interest in cloud computing due to the pandemic?
Very much,
Any
yes.
911 centers doing, you know, work from home for certain call takers, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so, you know, when the pandemic hit, I was selling Vesta for Motorola in the Pacific Northwest, and immediately got calls for command posts, right? That's, you know, those were expensive, they're a heavy lift, okay? You know, our stuff, yeah, here, just, you know, just buy a license and you're up, you're going, you know.
And I'm assuming this is all contingent on your internet.
No, it's not, so it's not, because we could ride, so ideally we'd like to ride on the EZNet that you have, but if that's not going to work, either because of business reasons or any other reasons, we will supply the network, you know, to you, okay? And you guys were also talking earlier about Starlink. We use Starlink for next generation core services. Avalon, which is Catalina Island, we couldn't find vendors to get 2 terrestrial paths out there, and so we're using Starlink to connect to them. So Starlink is, you know, hitting and is real, and, you know, like I said, we're using it.
So in rural Colorado, there's a possibility of somebody dispatching from home, regardless of the strength of their.
Yes, yeah, with Starlink, yes. Or if there's microwave, the state has microwave or whatever, we can use it. And in California, every PSAP's having 4 connections for their next generation core services. When the next generation core services are turned on, we sit on top of the next generation core services. But since most of them aren't turned on yet, in fact, there's only like 2 or 3 that are turned on at this point. We, you know, we're deploying this in California, and so are other companies. But, you know, for the transition, we usually provide 2 links, 2 terrestrial links, and then if there's any other links they want, we'll provide those as well.
Will this increase call latency?
No. And our experience with using with Starlink is there's a tiny bit of latency, but it's not bad at all, and it's not jittery or anything like that.
Even without Starlink, with just the basic service, because there's more transport distances and processing, does that increase latency?
No, it does not. We have, you know, anything terrestrial works just fine.
I would guess that's particularly true if you were writing over the EZNet to the PSAP, because it'd be the same path.
Yep.
And this is Scott. Jeff also has his hand up.
Yeah, so a couple questions. One, I assume there would be a monthly recurring cost associated with this. It would be above what the tariff costs are for our concurrent sessions. And two, can this handle the administrative CPE call flow also, or would it be strictly the 911 traffic?
Yeah, I don't know that it would be above your tariff costs, as they're set now. I mean, we're basically on par with what you bought, if you bought a Vesta system or a Viper system in the past. Everything I've seen in California as far as the pricing goes, it's been on par, and other places as well. Even when we've had to provide the network, the costs are still within that range.
Wow, that's great. And the answer to the CPE call handling question for administrative calls, would this handle that also?
Yes, so, we would terminate, so if there's no way of getting your lines up into the cloud, we would terminate them locally, and then we would put them up into the cloud.
And to add on to your other question, Jeff, this is Daryl. Currently the tariff does not cover CPE costs. You're paying for those out of your local emergency telephone charges. So unless the tariff were modified to include this, then yeah, that would be a separate cost that you'd have to pay.
Great, thanks.
And this is Scott. Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, but in this model, software as a service, one way to think about it for the benefit of the group is that, when you do need to typically plan for an upgrade to your CPE equipment, whether it's Viper or Vesta, others that are on-prem, it's usually a capital expense. It's like usually a 3 to 5 year capital outlay. This is more of an operating expense, kind of to your point, Jeff. So it typically, there are price variances, but SaaS providers usually aren't that much off from on-prem providers. It's just instead of being a once every 5 year capital outlay, it's a monthly expenditure. But Fred, I don't know if that's exactly your guys' model or not.
It is our model. We prefer the SaaS model, but we will bend to whatever model works best for anybody. But we do like the SaaS model.
And for those wondering about the discussion of whether it's going over the EZNet or not, right now the EZNet tariff doesn't include this, but one of the things that was talked about at the NG911 strategic planning workshop that we had in January, one of the things that Lumen discussed was the possibility of providing essentially a VPN tunnel using the EZNet that could be used for providing services like this or other types of services that you would want to get the same reliability that you have for the EZNet for those types of services instead of going over the public internet.
And this is Scott. I also want to just chime in too. The questions regarding latency and jitter and such are really good questions. They're definitely important when we're talking about 911. But just so you guys know, from a technology perspective, what Fred's covering and what his company's doing here is not really different than how cell phone companies operate today. They're all going over the same IP backbone network. So you really, to his point, you should not see additional latency. But then Fred, it would be important for high redundancy, right? And high failover capability. How do you guys typically approach that?
So for the most part, again, because now the network is the survivability and the diversity of the network is more important than it used to be. Because your call handling is being, provided by it. So, we want to make sure that there's no choke points, meaning that, anywhere in the network that the same, like if we're working with two different vendors, that there's no place where both vendors converge at some point, right? So we look way far down the network and we will tell you, you have a problem here. Or if you want us to, we will solve that problem by using different technology or using a different vendor.
This is Scott. Thanks, Fred. So is that usually part of your assessment and proposal then that you provide up front?
Yes, it is, because we want to make sure it's going to work. And the thing that where you can get in trouble is the networks.
Thank you. And then interesting, because I'm sorry, this is the IT and me coming out. for everybody. Just interesting, you know, to the extent that there are administrative lines that this would handle as well. I mean, is that something that if the agency wasn't ready to quite take the plunge from a 911 perspective, but wanted to give it a try, they could start off with administrative lines routing through your system, use that for a period of time, and then transition over to 911?
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, usually when we've given like evaluation type of things, we've given them like a test system, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that.
And this is Scott. Sorry, everybody. I'll stop with my IT questions.
Good question, Scott.
I
Thank you.
have a quick question.
Go ahead.
What's the compatibility on the cloud-based system versus a legacy system, for example, when it comes to rollover? So if we have an MOU with a neighboring jurisdiction, say we have cloud-based and they have legacy, how's the rollover?
How to roll over? Do you have a switch now, or do you have some sort of doesn't looking at Jack probably knows the answer.
I'm guessing it's probably handled on the ESINet, right? Lumen takes care of it.
Yeah, that's the network part of it, right? So if you hit a switch today and you buy us, you'd still hit the switch. Okay.
Even if they have like the other agency has a legacy.
So what they could do, I mean, what could happen is they hit the switch, right? And then the network routes to you, and then we IP it over back to them, and they're still up and running. So that's one option. But in the world of next generation core services, right? You know, that goes away. And it goes away because now you can program into the network what happens if they can't see you. Okay. So, you know, I always like to talk about the too big to fail agency, right? And instead of looking at we need an agency or we need a backup center, we need to distribute our calls out to this area. Okay. And it could be in another part of the state, for instance, right? So, you know, if something were to have, you know, it's tough to talk about Denver Metro because that's where the majority of your population is. However, you know, you could reroute those calls to the more remote places. A, they would know that something happened. And B, you know, they could still get calls and do something with them. Now, there's other considerations further down, you know, the chain as far as, you know, how you handle that with CAD and radio. However, CAD and radio are all heading this way as well. So eventually they'll catch up to 911 and offer those services as well. So.
Yeah, I would say even to a lesser extent, even the rural local exchange carriers, the wireline providers, they're all moving to IP2. I mean, it's all kind of going in the same direction.
Yeah, that's why that admin line question is tough to answer because it's going to be different for everybody because everybody handles admin lines differently. So some pay for a service, some pay, you know, some have their own PBXs, some have analog PBXs or digital PBXs, some have IP PBXs, but they're at capacity, like you can't put any more cards in them, so you can't get a card to, you know, that type of stuff. So. But, you know, worst case, we terminate it locally and send it up to the platform. Any other questions? Are you all hooray for cloud? Any concerns, anything like you're thinking about, like you didn't cover this or, you know?
Throw in a joke, what happens on a sunny day?
What happens on a sunny day? It works.
You know, the only thing I would say, you know, when you're thinking about these things, there are regulatory considerations to take into account. Like right now, Lumen's responsibility ends wherever the call is demarked. So if you're demarking to a cloud solution, that's where Lumen's responsibility ends. And then you want to make sure that whatever contract you have in place,
well, we would take up that.
You know, that's where then the CPE vendor in that case takes responsibility for the call, and it's up to them. But those are the kinds of things you have to think about just to realize that, oh, we can't rely on one company for delivery all the way to the call center if we're using this type of solution, and that may be fine. You just have to be aware of it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
If I
Appreciate
can
it.
do anything else for you, please let me know. If you want, I'll be a more active participant, you know, because I do listen, I sit on, listen, and I do hear things like I could contribute to, but I haven't yet. Because I'm a vendor and I don't want to sound like I'm swaying or anything, so, but I will participate more. If you need me to volunteer for something, let me know.
Good job, Holly.
Thank you.
I scared everybody.
Scott, are you still on?
I am. Thanks, Daryl. This is Scott. So with that, it concludes our presentation. Do we have any items for open discussion by anybody on the call? Well, hearing none, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move. This is Andrew. I move.
Thank you, Andrew. Moved. Can I get a second?
Come on, folks. You can do it.
This is Ryan at Vero. I'll second that.
And this is Scott. Thank you, Ryan. Any opposed to adjournment for our marathon meeting? I think we set a record.
Scott, this is Daryl. I don't want to hold up adjournment. I just want to note that we do have a resource center board meeting after this. I'm not sure we have enough board members in attendance, but I did put the link in the chat if anybody would like to attend that as well, if you haven't gotten enough today.
This is Scott. Thank you, Daryl. So yes, if you are interested in joining that meeting, please look at the link that Daryl posted in the chat. Okay, with that, we will adjourn. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And as always, thank you for our interpreters for all of your hard work. And we'll be back together again in November. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.
So, sounds like.